those that are not normal, or that could be anomalous or problematic, you can then better target what you're looking at and spend more of the time and effort looking for the things we should be focused on. The complications with this is that transactions look broadly similar. You have a sender, you have a recipient, you have a sending bank, you have a receiving bank, and you have some notion of a payment purpose in between. And there's millions to look through daily, and criminal transactions are a tiny portion of that. So it's not a needle in a haystack problem, it's a needle in a stack of needles problem. So differentiating that potentially criminal activity from the legitimate transactions means we have to understand the context of the payment. We have to, and ideally considering a range of factors. So, for example, a large transaction in any one account could be a huge fraud. It could be someone attempting to drain the account. Or it could be someone paying a solicitor to buy a house. And if you create a rule that says, show me every payment above a certain level, you'll catch both of those. And there, thankfully, are more people buying houses than there are conducting fraud. In HSBC, we're trying to turn then to new techniques to leverage these data sets and use AI and machine learning to establish that context. And essentially we're using it to look for patterns, look for anomalies, look for outliers. And at core, all of these techniques then try to find essentially the same three questions, which is who's this customer, what are they doing with their money, and does that make sense? Ultimately, criminals are quite sophisticated. They know that the existing systems we use look for various flags, they look to avoid them, and they're constantly trying to find ways around them. So, for example, back to my one large payment, maybe they make lots of small ones instead of one large one. But I think with AI and machine learning, what we're finding is it gives us a much more sophisticated view of the problem, a much more contextual view of the problem. And we can consider, for example, not just the activity of a customer and what they're doing, but we can consider it in the context of all the other customers who look like that, who transact like that, who behave like that. Or we can look for outliers and changes as compared to previous behavior across a time series. We can also then look at other data sources that we can bring in and use that to kind of draw things together. And that ultimately is making us much better at working out which among the millions of legitimate transactions we process where someone is trying to move criminal money. So let me give you kind of two examples of sort of how we do that today using some of the more advanced techniques. One particular tool we use is called our Global Social Network Analysis tool, where we're combining bank data and external data, such as company ownership information, and bringing that together to identify networks and links between customers and transactions. So you can imagine here, one person making a transaction to someone else who is on the board of a company who's then transacting back to another company which the first person is on the board of. You start to see a network emerge there across various data sets. And what this does is it gives the investigator a powerful capability to look at the activity in the context of everything else that we kind of know about that network, to help identify activities and relationships which either on their face didn't seem suspicious and then become so because you're looking at the broader network, or vice versa, that on its face looks sort of problematic, but when you look at the broader network, you can explain why that might be the case. That's built on a framework of kind of well-known open source coding languages. It's the stuff that most, meat and bread to most data science teams. We're using in that, again, back to the scale issue, we're using about 40 billion different data points to construct the diagrams, and we're referencing over 30 billion financial transactions. So that's kind of the one around networks and social networks. The other one that we're working on is what we call our Cognitive Investigator tool, or CogI, which helps our analysts when they're looking at a case of potentially suspicious transactions. And typically a transaction or a number of transactions end up generating an alert. And that sort of starts that whittling process I talked about a minute ago. What CogI is really doing is it's extracting all the relevant data features to bring together a view that presents to the investigator and says, this inherently looks like things that we think are okay, or it inherently looks like something that I can't really explain. And it gives the investigator then evidence and basis for decision. So the idea is not to replace the decision of the investigator, but rather to augment the human in actually making better decisions and to understand the comparison between across all this vast number of investigations and data points. And CogX is doing that, making its recommendations, having learned how our expert investigators would approach a similar set of information. So, it's a sort of supervised model underneath that. So these tools are kind of improving our ability to find signs of potential financial crime and also to help us get better than at investigating those signs. At the same time, though, and this is the bit I said at the beginning, it's a bit more nuanced than that. This is the part for the nuance. It's not really removing the need or replacing the need for kind of human judgment and decision making and how we think about those issues. So given that, given all those benefits, the reality is we have to continue to work in the complex framework that a large international bank operates. So just like every bank, we're very closely regulated by lots of different regulators. Those regulators have a variety of views at times around how we do what we do and what can and should be done. And perhaps more importantly, we exist as an entity to serve our customers. And they need to be confident about the way we're handling our data. They need to be willing to understand the purpose of the approach and why we're doing it, which means we have to be able to explain in plain terms how we're fulfilling our obligation to handle their data ethically and in a way they would expect, and help explain clearly what it is we're trying to accomplish with that. So in that sense, strong governance and transparency, explainability are critical to what we're doing. We can't really rely on sort of black box technologies. And we talked a bit about this yesterday, but if there's kind of one recommendation I have for folks looking to build tools, it's got to be explainable to us so that it can be explainable to all the people we need to explain it to. Because fundamentally, if it's a black box, we can't explain in those plain terms to our customers. They wouldn't want it, they wouldn't accept it, and frankly, neither would our regulators. So our core development principles then kind of spring from those nuanced obligations, which is first, how do we use the simplest tool for the job? So it isn't, as much a question of how do we go use the most sophisticated technique, the most cutting edge math that we can think of, and how do we bring that to bear? We do try to do that in the places we should, and when we have problems that need those techniques, we absolutely use them. But it's a question of, what is the simplest way we can do what it is we're trying to accomplish? And how do we do that in a way that doesn't add new layers of complexity to what is already a complex approach at an organization our size and scale? And you can imagine 8 billion transactions, 66 countries, 39 million clients. There's a reasonable amount of complexity in operating that kind of approach. So let me wrap up then by kind of talking about where this might sort of take us into the future. The first thing is, we at HSBC really believe that new technology and the way we use it enables us and the wider banking sector to make a significant impact in the fight on financial crime. As I talked about, we are well embarked now on doing this in a new and what we're pretty convinced is a fundamentally better way. And the tools like AI and machine learning give us an ability to manage the large volumes of data we have and greater insight, back to thinking about my function as a function that does insight, greater insight into the activities and suspicious transactions that we have. And this in turn enables us to deliver better information to law enforcement so they can better target the kind of activity that has the real human impact that we're trying to counter when you think about human trafficking and narco trafficking and these kind of terrible societal ills. But at the same time, the better insight into our customers and better understanding of where the risks really lie actually enable us to provide better services to people who right now may be seen as too great a risk for people in the financial system. And that, I think, is an interesting kind of point to maybe take into the discussion in terms of if we can develop our new technology, if we can do it in the right way with the right governance and the right oversight, we'll not only be helping law enforcement target these societal ills, we'll also be helping our customers and wider society, one, by making it harder for criminals to operate, and two, hopefully by allowing more folks in an inclusive way into the banking system. So maybe I'll pause there, and happy to have the discussion. Thanks very much.
Do you want to join us for the panel? Great. So we're just going to move into our panel discussion now. We'll just give everyone a moment to come on the stage. I am going to sit on this end so that I can see the clock. So welcome. My name's Heather Adams. I'm a managing director at Accenture, where I focus on resilience risk and helping our financial services clients prevent financial crime. Welcome to the rest of our panelists. We have James Varga, CEO of the ID Company, Emily Orton, CMO of Darktrace, Martin Goodson, Chief Scientist and CEO of Evolution AI, and Hussein Kasai, on Fido, CEO and founder. Thanks, everyone. So we're going to talk a bit more around the topic of identity, financial crime, and security. Financial crime and security are of increasing concern to governments and commercial enterprises alike. An estimated $2 trillion a year is laundered through the global financial system, and the cost of cybercrime is growing by more than 10% per year. It's now an estimated value at risk of $5.2 trillion globally over the next 5 years. Key to identifying networks of organized criminals, hacktivists, or nation-state attackers is to have an awareness of the identity of individuals and companies involved in transactions and engaging with our organizations as customers. To address this, new technologies and techniques are emerging to help better identify customers and counterparties and to identify threats within networks of people and transactions. We'll try and explore today the opportunities presented by some of those new techniques and some of the challenges in applying them to those areas. So maybe kicking off with a bit of a discussion around identity. James?
Okay. Well, first of all, identity is a very big topic, isn't it? So what we're really talking about here in terms of financial crime is identity verification, as we were talking earlier. I think it's identity verification that is one of the key points in the world of fraud and financial crime, because it's the point of attack that a lot of fraudsters have. It's the point of benefit, really. And fraudsters are incredibly, as we see with the numbers that increase every year, incredibly organized, incredibly sophisticated. They collaborate. They're better funded and more motivated than anybody in the industry to singly prevent that. I don't know if that's fair, Mark, but I think what we see in the market is an incredible amount of effort to get that financial benefit from either impersonation or direct fraud or money laundering or whatever the case is. And I think what we've got here is a few different perspectives on different aspects of preventing some of that risk with very different solutions. Ourselves, we live in a world of open banking and PSD2, so we try to help people use bank data to solve some of this problem. Almost as Mark described, leveraging that financial profile and that behavior to understand whether the person is real or not, but it's only one component. Any one component is always at risk. So combining these things together, which I think is probably one of the next phases of identity and identity verification, at least until we get to a point of centralizing that onto the consumer and switching the model and putting the individual at the heart of that conversation. Until we get to that point, I think the best that we can do is maybe collaborate, combine these different sources, social networks, whatever you want to call them, and try and find other ways to pinpoint the fraud activity. There's been some incredibly sophisticated activity in the last few years. A couple of years ago, and I think it was Florida in the States, a set of 10,000 bank accounts that were set up transferring money between each other to create false identities, personas, things that look like real activity. That's the level of effort I think fraudsters are going through in terms of identity and financial crime and that sort of thing. It's an incredibly difficult challenge for most people today, and that's, I guess, where we link into AI and machine learning and using more sophisticated methods to get access to more data sources, pull that together and find a way to deal with it.
Thanks, James. Can I ask Hussein maybe to add to that?
Sure. Good morning. So it's already been said, identity theft is the largest crime and the fastest growing crime in the world. And as Mark mentioned, of the estimated 5% of the world GDP that is laundered money, less than 1% of that is predicted or estimated to have been caught. So if this were any other industry where 99% of the funds kind of cheat the system and get away with it, we have a 99% failure rate. You wouldn't accept that in any other industry. And these are the funds that are used for human trafficking, drug trafficking, terrorist financing. It's as dark as it gets. So we have a long way to go. And so at Onfido, we set up the company 7 years ago. We power about 1,500 businesses who are remotely onboarding customers. So if you're an online remittance platform, for instance, and you're registering new users, at the point of registration, the user is asked to take a photo of their government's ID and a recording of their face. And then we use machine learning to verify that that ID seems genuine and that the photo on the ID matches the person's face. And the reason why we're kind of the reason why the identity ecosystem is broken and getting worse is because on the one hand, it's not really scalable to meet everyone face-to-face as you're onboarding them. It's not an easy experience. It's not frictionless. There are convenience issues there. And alternatively, over the last 150 years, we've relied on credit bureaus to help us essentially verify individuals. And the credit bureau model is ultimately a centralized database of everyone's date of birth, name, address, and so on. But it's no longer fit for purpose. And I learned at an early age that it's an important institution because it underpins our global financial economy, but it doesn't really, it doesn't help fraud in that businesses are paying the credit bureaus to stop fraud, but the credit bureaus are unintentionally making it worse by aggregating everyone's data, the data that fraudsters need to cheat systems, and then getting hacked. So they're not helping, which is a bit of a problem. And that's why, hopefully, these new solutions are here to start to sort of combat this large and growing problem. They don't intentionally sell data to fraudsters, but they make it worse unintentionally. I hope they don't anyway. If you have any information you should share. We were worried that this might not be a debate, but please do go ahead.
Martin, where do you think we are?
So let's introduce this whole concept of know your customer, KYC. So this is where a bank or other financial services institution is going to need to establish who they're transacting with. So if you open a new bank account, like let's say a business bank account for your firm, the bank is going to need to go through this whole process of KYC. It's a really laborious process, very document intensive. They may have hundreds of documents to read, just really simple stuff like they're going to need to look at company's house to check that you're legitimate. They're also going to read your website to make sure that it seems to be everything checks out that you say on your application form. It takes a really, really long time. Humans are just not very good at reading thousands of documents quickly, and sometimes you really need to pinpoint a piece of information that it's not really very obvious from reading the documentation. It's boring, it's really slow, it's really expensive, it's a really bad customer experience because it might take the customer weeks to open their bank account. But it's generally considered in the industry, it's a necessary evil. This is really the cornerstone of the whole fight against money laundering, terrorist financing, and so on. And it's supposed to be the thing that stops everything. And so this is the reason why over the last 5 years, banks have increased their compliance workforce by about tenfold. I think I heard an estimate that HSBC's 10% of their staff are in compliance, and a large chunk, I don't know if that's true, but a large chunk of them will be doing this kind of KYC stuff. However, the most important thing for everyone to remember is that none of this works. As has already been mentioned a couple of times, only about 1% of money laundering proceeds are actually detected. Everything is just getting through. The criminals are all getting away with it all of the time. And we think, so my company builds software for reading documents. That's all it does. It just reads documents so that humans don't need to. It can make some decisions in much the same way that a human would on a document. We think that if humans didn't have to spend so much time doing the donkey work of reading these really boring documents, they could spend a lot more time doing the investigative work that humans are just much better at. And humans are creative. The criminals are definitely creative. So the compliance professionals need to use what they're really good at, which is being creative as well.
Mark, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that. There you go. I'll take that. I think those points that came out are exactly the kind of right way to think about the problem, and kind of allude back to sort of what I was suggesting in terms of, we take a bit of our data at a point in the customer journey, and then we try to build systems to look at that without really considering, well, what else do you know at that point? What else can you bring to bear, and how do you bring that together? And certainly, the point around, look, if there is a repetitive process that's about pattern recognition, to the extent we can give that job to a machine, not only will the machine fundamentally be better at it than the human will, it's actually a more engaging process for the human to then deal on the back end with, right, now I actually know something, where do I go from there? And the point about making the point of the human decision come sort of later in the process, I think is a key one there. So, a lot of what we see these tools as doing is dealing with the sheer volume of it, so that by the time you're asking a person to make an investigative decision, they've got a much more complete picture, and they're not going around saying, yeah, but why is that field not quite filled out properly, and where did that data come from? If that's all dealt with, they then get to look at the problem and say, right, now what is this actually telling me about financial crime, and what do I know I should be looking for? And a machine can do some of that, but as you're saying, I mean, a human can be much better and much more creative, and I do think certainly what we're seeing in the fraud space is creative fraudsters who want to find a way and are highly motivated to beat it, because if they've got a 99% success rate, you can see why they'd be motivated.
Thanks. And Emily, we've talked quite a lot about fraud and financial crime so far, but from a security perspective, the threats that are out there are much broader, aren't they?
Yeah, I think we've heard a picture of complexity in the comments so far. Firstly, the threat landscape is getting much more sophisticated, as we've heard. You've got both targeted attacks that are probably pretty small in scale and going after specific individuals within an organization. And then we've seen things like, indiscriminate, very fast attacks. WannaCry a couple of years ago, where it's the scale and the speed is just too fast and too large for human teams to respond to. We're now going to see these machine speed attacks getting very sophisticated and getting very targeted. And you're already seeing that in the security space, where you have essentially sort of prototype AI programs being written for specific individuals, and they're going out at scale across an organization. And each one is customized. So I think clearly the sophistication is going to continue to increase. And we talked obviously a lot about criminals, but you also need to think about insiders and their potential to get involved in criminal activity as well. And so, how do you spot malicious from benign? Ultimately, organizations are dealing with, as I said, complexity, and there's lots of incremental improvements we can make to, lock windows, shut doors, stop, authenticate. But I think the shift we've seen in the last 5 years or so has been that you have to accept that you're going to have malicious activity on your networks, and you don't know where it's going to rear its head. We have remote working, we have cloud systems. Increasingly, a big problem is the Internet of Things. At Darktrace, we've seen, for example, a fish tank get compromised. The attackers actually got onto compromised a part of the underlying hardware in the fish tank, and actually it was an entertainment company, and they actually jumped to the corporate network of this entertainment company. We're looking at the high roller database of the casino and looking for high net worth individuals and getting banking information. We've seen we had another example of this. Was an insider incident where we found some malicious activity across the systems. We ended up looking in this server room and finding this particular device that was abnormal. We couldn't find it. We saw it on the network, but we saw it on our interface. We ended up finding underneath the floorboards in the server room, there was a server that had been plugged in. IT team had no idea. It was connected to the corporate internet, and it was actually mining for Bitcoin. So it's so complex today. So I think we've already seen the shift where organisations are having to look across the organisation. Think about it like a modern city where you can't control everyone that's going to get in, but you have to monitor it. And so we've already seen that financial organisations are already implementing that continuous monitoring across all of their systems, whether that's your SaaS programs or obviously your financial trading systems, etc. I think the next piece is where you see AI. We talked about sort of the issues around AI and false positives and things. You're going to see AI being trusted to actually take an action against a cyber attack. And that's the fundamental shift, because that means it has to be trusted enough that you think that AI is going to take the right decision when it finds a threat. That's the whole category of autonomous response, as it's known. And that's kind of the new piece that I think is going to be the big shift. And humans are going to have to trust it enough to actually prefer. You get to the point where you prefer the AI to respond to a machine speed attack when you're not in the office, as opposed to leaving it to escalate. So it's quite an interesting time for AI at the moment.
So lots of opportunities there. I guess with the shift, we've already mentioned the shift in big data and the processing power that now provides. The specific advanced analytical solutions are being deployed, perhaps to some of the example Mark's given, but then more autonomous AI is perhaps the next opportunity step. What other opportunities do we see? Do you want to add something? Anyone?
What other opportunities? I don't know. I guess there's a fundamental question on whether we've lost the battle or not already, and whether fraudsters are always outstrip. If you look at the pace of fraud increasing over the last, say, 10 or 20 years, they've always beat us. So the opportunity surely then has to be in how do we beat the fraudsters?
Right.
And any one-point solution, it probably doesn't work. So maybe more network views, associated sort of higher level collaborations between different either organizations and working together to kind of solve these pains, or maybe it's a fundamental flip in the model completely. Maybe as an industry we've completely lost the battle, and then we're all spending as organizations or companies or individuals the same amount of effort to solve the top layer of the problem, the top 20%, the almost superficial part of the problem. Maybe at some point what we need to do is stop trying to solve the problem for the individual to protect the consumer, because that's who's ultimately at risk. And maybe at some point we need to flip that model and put the individual in control of more and more of their data, give them the keys, and empower them to centralize some of that risk and some of that management. I don't know.
I think Hussein wanted to jump in there.
So, well, partly to disagree with Martin in that all criminals cheat the systems all the time. If they did that, we'd be out of work. But they are definitely sophisticated and getting worse. So specifically as for opportunities, so with us, when we entered the industry, it was commonplace for providers to say, we catch 100% of fakes. And the first thing that we did was tell everyone, no, they don't. No one does. And if they're telling you they are, then you should rethink what they're saying. And that this should be thought of as an antivirus option, where no provider can ever say they catch all the viruses. What you need is the opportunity is to cooperate and work together to reduce that. And that fundamentally, when a fraudster is trying to cheat a bank and they're caught or deterred, they're not going to go home and change their ID and change their mind and not be a fraud. They're going to go to the bank 2, bank 3. So the way that we've done it is feedback loops. So out of every 10,000 individuals that sign up to a client of ours, on average, about 200 will be trying to cheat the system or will be fraudsters. And of those, 3 successfully make it through. So we catch about 200 and we miss about 3. And we're very open with clients because they kind of know. Because their own manual teams would miss far more, and other options also miss the majority. So what we explain is that of the 200 that we catch, then often, when we're unsure, we have feedback loops with our internal teams. So if a passport is stained, we don't know if that's because it was in the washing machine or it was a sophisticated fraudster. But when a human double checks, they're able to reduce the false positives, and they're training the models so the models get better over time. But equally, we tell our clients, as and when we miss a sophisticated fake, you need to alert us, so we use those samples to build the next version. So sitting in the middle of all these different businesses and using machine learning and using labeling and human assistance so that you're continuously building on the feedback loops and improving. And that's why, for the first time, we're actually having an effective fightback. I mean, we're a client of dark traces, and it's exactly the same model. Like every time one of your clients has an attack, your models get better so that you prevent, I don't want to speak for you, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I hope it is, that's what we're paying for. You can tell me if it's not, we'll ask for a discount, but in the second and third instance, you kind of get better at detecting that. So that's the power of machine learning, essentially.
So this is a different point. I'm not going to respond to that directly, but I think a fundamental shift needs to happen now, because if you look at something like the Russian laundromat scheme. So the Russian laundromat scheme was a scheme to launder $80 billion from Russia, mainly through Moldova, and into the Western money system, actually mostly through London and through the UK. So this was a network of at least 2,000 firms which were fraudulent and who were opened up business banking accounts and conducted all of this money laundering. So the current system for detecting this is that you have individual KYC analysts reading the KYC information for these 2,000. I mean, 2,000 is probably a fraction of the reality. It's probably 10,000 at least. Individual KYC analysts will read the documentation, say, oh, that checks out. I'm going to onboard them into the bank. Everything seems to be fine. They're going to go through this KYC process. It all looks good. What they don't realize is that because we're dealing with a network, it's a ring of criminals. Most of the KYC information is kind of identical because they're just copying and pasting. You know, they're not that sophisticated yet because they don't need to be, because the banks aren't, because they're not joining the dots between the different organizations that they're dealing with. So for me, I think that's the next step, and that's something that's opened up to AI that's just not open to humans. Humans are incapable of dealing with 10,000 data points and to make a decision. They just can't do it.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's, you know, going back to the opportunities and you know, have we all already lost and should we just go home? I don't think that. I'm actually fairly optimistic about this kind of approach, but I think it speaks to exactly kind of what you were alluding to, which is the need for sort of design thinking in the space and say, look, what is it that we're trying to do? Because fundamentally, if you're trying to catch a criminal network one account at a time just by looking at their onboarding data, you're going to miss things. And if you're fundamentally trying to then find that network one transaction at a time, you're going to miss things. And if you're not having conversations across with other peers about, well, what are you seeing and how is that working, you won't know all the things you need to know. I think each one of those has pluses and minuses that we have to think about how we implement and how we put in. And you know, the use of machine learning, certainly, you know, there are places where you'll trust a machine to make a decision because the speed of it, particularly in a cyberspace, and you know, there's a lot of crossover between cyber and fraud, where you'll have a machine maybe make a decision, and other places you very much wouldn't. And so all of that to me suggests that what's needed in this space is a bit more broader design thinking about the fundamental purpose of how we're tackling the problem itself, and saying, look, there's a piece of this that can be detected at account opening. There's a piece of this that can be detected using machine learning where you can just stop things because you probably don't want to see them. There's a piece that's going to rely on human investigation to figure it out. What I don't think we've done collectively as an industry is really step back and say, okay, what are those pieces and where are the pluses and minuses of that? And how do we then, having done that design thinking, explain it to the huge stakeholder community around our customers and regulators, and to say this is why we're doing the things that we're doing.
Yeah, so maybe, Emily, did you want to just add to that? You were nodding vigorously.
I was just going to say, I think the opportunity, and we kind of often understate the achievements of the industry so far. You know, it's quite a bleak picture when you read the news, and it is a bleak picture. And I think fraudsters are still making a lot of money, still lucrative area to go into. But you know, AI is now responding to a cyber threat every 3 seconds worldwide. That's not sort of reported on, but it's being caught at an early stage, you know, before it even gets to, you know, your critical data systems, preferably. So it's really about catching things early. It's not about catching everything that's getting in. It's about catching things early, taking a probabilistic approach. And, you know, there is a lot of talk about AI, machine learning, heard in the keynote about the problem of rules-based approaches where you're going to miss things or you're going to have exceptions to rules. So really this idea of a self-learning AI and whatever AI you're deploying in your organization, it needs to understand your organization. It's going to be very different to another one. And so, the way Darktrace works is it's essentially building up a bespoke understanding of your organization. If it's machine learning that's too reliant on certain data sets that need to be constantly looked at and constantly updated and tweaked and configured, that's going to be much more burdensome approach, and it's going to have stuff's going to get through. So you really want that system working really hard for you and actually taking the feedback, self-learning, learning from everything it's seeing. We're really going to need a self-learning approach when you look at kind of the future of attacks and potentially AI being inserted into those attacks.
Yeah. So if technology and data are not really the constraints now, what are the challenges to being more effective and being further ahead of the criminals in this area? Is it collaboration that's required, or is it something else? You can start since you have the mic.
So collaboration. I think there's a big piece of stakeholder communication and joining up the whole organisation. Security is starting to be seen as a business, a board level issue, business issue. But you kind of really need to start there before you've even perhaps thinking about your technology stack. Is do you have engagement at the C level? Do you have this as a board level issue, and right from employee awareness through to the kind of senior stakeholders. So yeah, collaboration is a big piece. I think we are much more aware about cybersecurity now, and I think there's no silver bullet. So everyone needs to understand that, and at that point you can actually celebrate some of the achievements and get your whole business behind a more kind of probabilistic approach where you're just getting much, incrementally better at catching things early rather than having this kind of, is your business secure, yes or no? That's not really a realistic question anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of constraints, there are a fair number, but I think one of them is first around information sharing and thinking about what information can be shared between and among jurisdictions at a client level, at an institution level, and at a jurisdiction level, and you get different answers to each of those in different jurisdictions and across. So that's the first kind of hurdle or constraint is, can we even bring the data together to do the kind of work we would want to do, and then to what extent can we and what can't we? And then second, I wouldn't term it a constraint, more an obligation. We have obligations that, frankly, criminals don't. And we care deeply about how we use our customers' data and making sure that what we're doing is ethically correct and looking at it across the wide variety of our customers. Criminals don't care if their models are biased. And I think when you start thinking about that, there's an inherent asymmetry in the ecosystem that you're working in that isn't. It's not a constraint. It's an obligation that we should have and welcome having. But it's a question of how do you then, within that asymmetry, actually respond quickly enough to have the impact you're trying to have.
Just to add, if there are two other things. One is an attitude thing. So we're lucky to have about 240 people on the team working towards our mission. And we explain at the interview stage, we're not a compliance tool. There are many of them out there you should go and apply, but we are a fraud detection tool. And we are here to stop these bad actors. And the good news is there are many of them. And so there's going to be a tough task. So that from day one, that's essentially the fundamental focus, because there's a difference. I mean, you can use a credit bureau model and you're fully compliant, but it's about stopping the bad actors. The second thing is an awareness, where specifically, like this is, to your point on collaboration, businesses are now collaborating. They're indirectly or implicitly collaborating, but because of deploying software such as Darktrace, and then behind the scenes, they're kind of all sharing. Similar with us, the good thing is that no personal data needs to be shared. In our use case, if we're learning what a New York driving license looks like, we don't need to store any personal data. We just know what patterns, the fonts, and so on. So we can detect fakes just by learning from that. So it's the awareness of sharing that is happening now in the private sector because there's no alternative. But from the government perspective, it sounds good and you get headlines when you have 20 more police officers walking the streets to stop a 15-year-old stealing a packet of cigarettes from your local grocery store. But really, if they were aware of the billions going through the cyber crime and other networks, they'd be deploying those resources at the Met Police and elsewhere that are counter-attacking these cyber networks and fraud rings. Just because I can tell you, as far as the Met Police goes, those fundings are being cut. And it is in many ways the biggest bang for the buck to stop actual, not all crime is bad crime, but significant crime if more is invested. And that's only going to happen if the public at large are aware of the magnitude and seriousness of the large crime that is invisible in the sense that it's digital.
Sorry, I just want one quick sort of specific question. You said there it's a fraud detection tool. It's not a compliance tool. I'm just wondering how you're differentiating those because we don't actually see them as all that different.
So fraud detection is, you could think of as a table, and a subsector of that is compliance. So if you are signing up to a remote bank, that bank or an online bank, detecting that your date of birth, name, and address exists on a credit bureau is sufficient. But what we are doing, for instance, over and above that, is to show a government ID, is to show that the face of the person matches the photo on the ID, is to do a liveness check on the face. So the liveness check is, you don't have to do, that's not in legislation anywhere. The majority are now switching those kind of things on because they themselves want to stop the bad actors. It's going over and above what you legally are required to, is my main point.
Yeah, that's right. That's the thing I'm drawing out is when you say compliance tool, you mean that thing that banks need to do to minimally fulfill their compliance. And we've got lots of tools that go beyond that. But yeah, that's okay.
Great. So I want to leave some time for audience questions. Perhaps before I do that, I'll just ask Martin and James quickly. What does the future look like? Martin, maybe you go first.
Horrible. I spoke about the Russian laundromat. That's at least 2,000 accounts that have been opened. Probably when the Russian laundromat happened, which was a couple of years ago, you probably needed human beings to write the forms out. You probably don't need humans to write the forms out. You could write something that looks quite good with natural language generation software now. So probably the criminals are just going to scale up another level. You'll be looking at 200,000 accounts being opened by machines rather than by human beings now. So I think it's going to get harder.
I'm going to step forward slightly and be a little bit more positive about it because I do think there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I think AI. Sorry, excuse me. I think AI is going to contribute quite heavy to that. I think we're at the edge of. Someone described it to me the other day as a data apocalypse. That our personal data, which actually powers a lot of the risk that we're talking about, the crime that we're trying to prevent against, is based on name, address, date of birth, details, account number, sort codes, whatever that are being used to drive this fraudulent behavior or email account. I think at some point we're going to get a critical phase in that evolution where we lose control enough that we have to do something about it. I'm a big believer in the self-sovereign model. I think consumers should own their data. I think GDPR is a fantastic thing. I think the only way to really solve this problem en masse is to empower the individual. That's a little ways off. I think until then, if we start to collaborate, if we start to use some of these tools, you said the data and the technology is there. I think it's kind of there. We have to learn how to use it. We have to understand it still. That's the middle ground, The AI, the machine learning, the techniques that we use have to develop enough. We have to get enough trust in them to rely on them to let them do things for us. That'll take a big part of the bandwidth away so that we can then focus on the harder part of the problem. A lot of that's around the data and the personal data is being used and how we can understand that, how we can understand behavior across sectors and regions and so forth. And if we can do that to build up a better picture at the same time as starting to move the controls back to the consumer, then maybe we will crack the nut at some point.
Thank you. Would anyone in the audience like to ask a question?
It's got to be one or two. Come on.
Hi, a question for Mark. HSBC, you've talked about trying to share data, but are you looking at joining things like the Cyber Defence Alliance, which is British banks sharing that sort of data?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not quite sure where we are in terms of participating in Cyber Defense Alliance. On consortiums generally and kind of collaborating in general, I think, we absolutely participate in a number of kind of information sharing consortiums, both in the UK and in other jurisdictions where we operate. I think, there's kind of two ways you can do that I think are really useful. One is in the detailed consortium, if you can get the right information protections in place and you can actually share the sort of detailed granular data is one. More broadly, and it's more easier to share. It's easier to share at this level. Is to then have a discussion around typologies and what are we seeing and how do we share that kind of information. And we do quite a lot of that formally and informally in a number of mechanisms that exist. So the Cyber Defense Alliance, I'm not actually entirely sure specifically on that. I'll have to go check. But certainly in the consortiums, and within the UK, there's a joint money laundering intelligence task force run by the UK government, which we participate in, as do a number of other institutions. And that is around that. How are we understanding the threat that's being posed by fraudsters and cyber criminals?
Hi, my name is Osborne from Horizon. I just wanted to know your view on fintech banks like Monzo, Starling Bank. What do you guys think about their security systems? Because most people think they are enhancing fraudsters, basically, because they are fintech banks. So what do you guys think?
So we work with the majority of fintechs and online banks. So that was the impression 3 or 4 years ago when these online banks started. The assumption was, how can you have an online bank? Fraud is tough as it is. The assumption was that if you're purely online, fraud is going to make it easier for fraudsters. And what's happened over the last 2 or 3 years in particular is that mainstream banks have seen these online banks are able to scale as effectively and control risk and fraud to the same standards as mainstream banks can, in part because the underlying assumption was seeing someone in a bank branch with a human eye is somehow superior to what digital machine learning powered technologies are able to do. But the fact of the matter is that it's been scientifically proven that at scale, machine learning models can do a better job of facial detection and ID detection than the human eye can. So we've been able to prove that these online sort of technologies are not only much more convenient for consumers to sign up, but as secure, if not more secure. And the fact that over the last 2 years, the mainstream banks have spun up their own digital banks or invested in the digital banks is kind of proving that the latest trend of technologies is sort of assisting the next wave of online solutions. And that benefits everyone because it streamlines costs, it enables access to the bottom of the pyramid, it has a much better customer experience, and so on.
Hi, thank you. Linda Knowles from HSBC. So we've spoken a lot this morning about how AI is used in a positive way to learn about what criminal activities are happening. Have we thought about the prospect of AI using in a very negative way? So obviously, if AI is able to machine learn, etc., etc., how are we thinking about the defense of our systems against negative AI?
Well, I've already mentioned one thing, which is natural language generation. I think it's very new field, really. There are state-of-the-art developments every month. At the moment, it's extremely difficult to detect a machine-written piece of text compared to a human-written piece of text. I mean, the technology is developing, but it's an active research topic.
Yeah, and I think the future is AI on AI attacks within corporate networks and industrial networks and cloud networks, etc. So, it's a different future we're facing. We're already seeing the beginnings of a very sophisticated computer code. It's not at scale, but it's only inevitable that, as you say, attackers are going to use the latest technologies and start launching extremely credible spear phishing very difficult to distinguish because they know how you talk to certain colleagues, or they know how you interact in personal email communications, which might be different. They'll have access to social networks, be able to glean information and put out something that for any busy person, or not, to be honest, it's going to be very difficult. You know, I think there used to be a sort of thing like, oh, you're a bit stupid if you click on a link, but I don't think that's true. You know, we can't just write it off as employee training. The other thing you're going to see is that within the network, once they get in, they're going to be much better at hiding under the radar, going under the radar of sort of your traditional security tools on the network. So very challenging. It's essentially whoever's algorithm is better is going to win that battle. We're already seeing it to an extent, and we'll definitely see it more. And I think that ultimately you have to get onto the forefront, and a lot of organizations are doing that. They're getting ahead. They have to be prepared for that future, because they're going to be caught out if they get hit with some of these attacks. Yeah.
So one last question.
Hi, it's Philippi for Mark. My question is different from fraud, credit risk, marketing, or insurance, where you have clear performance data. You know whatever definition you give in performance, the bad and the good. You don't have that in financial crime and money laundering. So my question is how you train your data if you don't have that, and what the limitations it creates for the use of AI in financial crime.
Thank you. I just want to take a second to appreciate the question, because it's a very, very good question, and one that we really struggle with, which is, just to elaborate on a second, in fraud, you get a very clear 0-1 outcome. It either was the customer or it wasn't. They either stole the money or they didn't. And if it wasn't and they did, well, then that was fraud, and we can go look for that. In money laundering, it's almost the opposite problem, right? The money launderer is trying to not be detected. So the fact that you didn't detect it could mean you didn't have it, or it could mean that the launderer was successful in not being detected. And so I think the way we go about that, it's a number of ways. There's no one solution to that. One is, we talked earlier about kind of consortiums and how we're talking to folks about known typologies and what things look for. What things to look for, and so we're doing some of that. I think you've got outcome data of a sort. You've got the things that you filed in all the places and jurisdictions that you filed. You've got the investigations that you've looked at and said these are beyond simply filing because we had an obligation to file. We actually know this was a more serious case. I think you've got some of those. And then I think you've also got, and this is where it becomes, I think, better at a machine learning level, and frankly, better as you get more sophisticated in your techniques. You may not have overall 0-1 outcomes at a top level, but you can say this is a known typology that heavily associates with a particular kind of financial crime. And so you can think of, if you start to break that down, of, okay, what does it really take to be a human trafficker? Well, I have to move people across borders. I have to move money. I have to establish places where I'm bringing people in. You can begin to think of what that looks like, and you can start to target the typology. So it's a sophisticated, nuanced answer that doesn't really have the nice, clean 0-1. And I really do wish all the money launderers would say, hey, we've gotten one past you. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work like that. So we try to do everything we can to try to train those models.
So you definitely don't have a 0-1 kind of label, but there is data. It's mostly unstructured, though. There are suspicious activity reports and other documentation. It's just not in a nice structured form that you can just read from a database and run a machine learning model on. You need to do some work. But now, with machine reading technologies, you can structure the data. You can read the suspicious activity report and label it with some of the typology information and do it in a two-step process.
Thank you. So I'm afraid that draws us to the end. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience, and thank you to our panelists, Mark, Hussein, Martin, Emily, and James. Thank you.
Hello. Don't go anywhere, because we are going straight into the next session on AI and the impact of AI on insurance. which is going to be fascinating. The panelists are worried they're not going to have enough time to cover all of the impact of AI on insurance. So it's going to be an amazing panel. So can I ask you, if you're at the back, just come forward, because we have some sort of background noise, some trucks, some building work and things, and it's much better sort of hearing-wise if you're at the front. So don't be shy. Come forward. It's also, I think, slightly warmer if we can all kind of be closer together. So please do come forward. So I, for one, after that session, will be checking my fish tank in the office to make sure that it isn't being hacked by anyone. Yeah, sure. So without further ado, Reza is going to be doing the next keynote, which is all about the impact of AI on insurance. And he is the chief scientist at AIG. He's also a lecturer at Oxford, so you're kind of going back to university here. I will let the panel introduce themselves, and then I will hand over to Reza now to do his keynote.
Is the mic working? Okay, cool. I'm waiting for the slides to come so I can start. Oh, doesn't seem to show the whole screen. But well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'll be talking about AI-first insurance and opportunities and challenges it introduces to the industry of insurance. In an interview at Davos last year, Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, mentioned that the fast developments in deep neural nets has been surprising him, despite him having a front row seat to the whole show. And he's not alone. Many scientists in the field who were actively doing research in that field couldn't see it coming at that pace. And it's evident, the excitement about the development is evident in the number of times terms related to AI is getting mentioned in corporate earning calls. Like, for example, here you see terms such as machine learning showing exponential growth in terms of how often they get mentioned in corporate earning calls. But of course, that creates a lot of room for many predictions about what AI can and cannot do in different industry verticals, including insurance. But of course, in my talk, I try to steer away from predicting the future of AI, because even people who were more genius and smart in the field made some of the mistakes in terms of their predictions. The famous one is Alan Turing, one of the brilliant minds of AI history. In his famous 1950 paper, talks about how he thinks the field of AI developing. And in part of the paper, he talks about, if I actually read from the paper, he said, I should be surprised if more than 10 to the power of 9 bits was required for satisfactory playing of the imitation game. So this is the paper actually where Alan Turing introduces the imitation game, and he predicts 10 megabytes is what we need in terms of memory for computers to play the imitation game and have a satisfactory performance there. And the number comes from the size of Encyclopedia Britannica, volume 11. So basically, prediction is a tough game in terms of future of industry in light of AI, so we steer away from it, and most of the stuff we talk about is in light of what AI can do today and is almost predictable for the next few years. So one framework that might help talk about the developments of AI in various industry verticals is the one that comes from the book Prediction Machines by Ajay Agrawal and co-authors. What they argue is that the cost of prediction has dropped significantly in the past few decades. So basically today we see prediction happening very cheaply and at a very low cost. And they argue that as a result of this, what we are going to see is that many industries will try to rethink and reimagine their industry to benefit from this cheap economy. So for instance, he argues a similar thing happened in photography. So photography was a chemistry problem, and computing became so available, so cheap, then that turned photography from a chemistry problem into a computing problem. Now we've got photography devices on our mobile phones and various computing devices. So he says that on the same type of trend, you're going to see, for example, HR was a human problem. Now it's becoming an AI prediction problem. Driving was a human expertise and experience problem, is becoming a prediction problem. And the list continues. As you saw from the previous panel, cybersecurity was a heavy computer science, computer skill set problem. Darktrace basically is saying they made it a prediction problem. And fraud, as Hossein from Amphita was saying, used to be a huge amount of human looking at people in the bank kind of problem, and now it's become an AI and prediction problem. So then, what does that mean for insurance? Well, the good news for the industry is that insurance was a prediction problem centuries ago. In 1744, two ministers from Church of Scotland observed the problem they had, which was after the clergyman died, their family was left alone in need of some financial support. So they thought it would be great if they create a fund where different clergymen contribute a small amount to the fund, and as a result of that, that provides the money to support the families that are left behind after their death. And that became the foundation of what we know today as life insurance. And in order to solve for that problem, they approached a professor at the University of Edinburgh. And the three of them together started thinking about how to solve this problem, and they used what is known as Bernoulli's law of large numbers to build a model of how mortality is going to develop over time in a portfolio of people who might or might not die at some point in the soon future. And if you think about it, like if you use a simple example of a coin toss, what Bernoulli's law says is that for each toss of a coin, it's very difficult to predict, is it going to be head or tail? But if you have 100 coin tosses, you can estimate how many of them are going to be head, how many of them are going to be tail, but it's very difficult to say exactly which one of them is head and tail. So the old paradigm of insurance was that I have a portfolio of risks. At a portfolio level, I want to know what the risk is like. So therefore, insurance started to become a prediction problem, but still doesn't mean it cannot benefit from AI. There is no opportunity for rethinking and reimagining what AI can do. To explain it a little bit clearly, one way to think about insurance today is that of every dollar an insurance company makes, like if you look at a recent report by Swiss Re in commercial insurance, somewhere around 50 cents of that premium dollar they make is paid back as loss ratio, basically to pay for people who make claims. Slightly more than 20 cents of that dollar is spent on acquiring customers, and whatever is left, somewhere around 20 cents, is going to be split between internal operation costs and underwriting profit. So today, the part of this value chain that has been historically using prediction is mostly around estimating what that loss ratio is. A huge part of it is there. And of course, related to the reserving and other concepts as well, there's a huge amount of prediction going on. And I think if you see at the top as well, another thing insurance companies do is that they also add more to the dollar through investing that asset they earn through premiums in different asset classes. So that's the kind of framework that insurance is built on today. And then if you go back to the coin toss example, what happened in light of all these prediction became cheaper? A few other things also happened, which is predictions are broadly available. So in a way, things that we could not predict in the past seem to be predictable now. So in a way, it's almost like not only we can predict on 100 coin toss how many of them are going to be head or tail, but also we almost can predict right now for each coin toss, is it a head or tail? Not only that, but in a lot of sciences that is related to the risk that we are insuring, like in medicine, in cyber sciences, and so on, we also have the science that could be paired with a precise prediction to lead to prevention. So all these things together, I think, are still new opportunities for insurers to start to benefit from. And in light of that, I think we could envision a future in insurance where, through better use of AI, you could drive the loss ratio down, you could improve the acquisition ratio cost, and internal operation, similarly, is likely to go down. And that leads to a higher margin and insurance profit. And also, similarly, the world of investment that insurance are operating in is full of complex data and complex decision-making, which again could benefit from this new economy of prediction. So therefore, the future world of insurance could lead to a higher margin, which could lead to more innovation. And that could result in magnificent impact in the society. So let me give a couple of examples. You saw Darktrace earlier. So imagine if somebody is insuring for cybersecurity, a portfolio of clients. Historically, it's been about, can we estimate the amount of claim that is going to come from that portfolio? Now, in light of technologies like the one that Dr. has introduced, you can actually mitigate some of these risks. Through the prediction machines that you have, you can predict that this pattern of behavior in the network is risky, therefore we can stop it from happening, and so on. So I think these are the kind of stuff that could drive the loss ratio down. So that's what I think is an opportunity that traditionally, when people think about prediction and insurance, they think about actuarial science and reserving and pricing, whereas I think that's a very interesting emerging opportunity in light of the new economy of prediction. But of course, it's not simple. It's a very challenging process because a lot of the time you hear companies that say, oh, we are the good old-fashioned company that we used to be. We have got a few apps. We've got a few neural nets. Therefore, we are AI first. But it's not really that. It's a lot more complex than that. It requires a fundamental rethink and reimagination of the business to truly benefit from AI. One way to explain it maybe is the autonomous vehicles. Usually you see the pilot phases of autonomous vehicles where there is a car, like this red one here, that has been built pre-AI. The car looks just like a normal car that we are used to in the past few decades. And then they thought, oh, autonomy is an interesting thing. Why don't we put a bunch of cameras around the car, on top of the car, and so on, so we can eventually see if this car can drive autonomously. The problem is, imagine if autonomy works. What's the implication for that company? They need to go through a fundamental rebuild of their manufacturing line, because now it means redo the process of manufacturing and everything, because you need to build a car that this camera and these sensors are embedded within it. So it's almost like multiplying the cost of the two phases of cost to get to the ultimate autonomy goal. Whereas what Tesla did is slightly different. So in Tesla, when you look at the Tesla built in 2014, 15, 16, and so on, you don't see any sort of cameras hanging around the car or something, because day one they thought autonomy is inevitable. It's more a question of if, it's more a question of when rather than a question of if. So therefore, from day one, they built the car with that in mind. So the car comes equipped with all the sensors and so on that you might possibly need to achieve all the way to level 5 autonomy. And then later, recently, you saw that Tesla released a software update that made the car autonomous. And that's the essence of designing based on AI. If you have the good imagination of where AI can take your industry, you can build the car from day one that way. So that brings us to the world of AI-first digital transformation. Digital transformation is a term that many industries are talking about today. But I think AI-first digital transformation is fundamentally about the result of reimagining every touch point and hence the overall business model in light of machine learning's ability to inform and assist the users and the customers and employees of a business. I think that's where the true north is. So if your company is going through a digital transformation, it's a good time to think about it. Do you want to have a no AI digital transformation and put those cameras on top of it later and create a second cost when that shows some level of success? Or you want to start from now rethinking and reimagining that process? I think that's a good question for insurance industry as a whole to think about. But again, as I said, it's not easy. It's going to create a few challenges for the industry. The first one is talent. I mean, I like this famous quote that I say here and there every now and then, which is talent can hit a target no one can hit, and genius hits a target no one can see. And I think it's very important for insurers as well as many other industries to invest in talent, because without talent, everything else stays a theory and you just become good at buying services from vendors. The second thing is the strategic data acquisition. I mean, Google is a fascinating story in a sense that for decades, they've been collecting so many data sets from so many users that eventually, through a huge amount of diverse data, we started to see that the old algorithms, that the theory of it existed decades ago, started to work. And that shows the power of data. Without data, how can you build machine intelligence? And I think that's a very important thing for insurers as well to be mindful of. And the third one is, of course, the concept of A/B testing and fast decision cycles. When your ecosystem goes digital, you need to be able to test a lot of things quite fast. And that's where it becomes very important to have clear KPIs of what better version of this feature means. And through that KPIs, you could quickly test scenario A, scenario B, and pick your winner one and continue to improve the system incrementally that way. And also, given that you're going to have so many of these tests, you cannot ask the CEO every time for permission for, oh, we want to move the logo of the app here. Can we get approval for this? And that's the reason you see in a lot of internet companies, there's a huge amount of push towards power going down to the PMs and engineers, because instead of a business with so many strategic big decisions, you end up having a digital business with many small decisions happening very fast, very frequently, that requires more trust, more power shift to engineers and PMs. And these are the 4 things that I think the industry needs to invest in. Maybe I should have started with this slide, but actually now is a good time to maybe describe what insurance is. So insurance, in essence, is the business of transferring risk to its optimal owner. Now, in light of AI and various scientific developments that we are seeing, how can we define the optimal owner of the risk? Maybe I should elaborate a little bit more. In the world of general insurance right now, there are estimates that are saying there is somewhere around $10 trillion of risk out there. And if you look at the size of premium in the insurance industry, we covered so far around 1 trillion of it. So there's 9 trillion of risk out there that exists, that people are experiencing, but there is no formal insurance coverage of that. So the question is, who's the optimal owner of that risk? Can AI help the current insurers to become better at owning these risks and be happy to have the risk transferred to them? Another area which is very interesting, now I'm kind of going a little bit to my Oxford role, but again, with an insurance in mind. Today, if you look at the global spend on healthcare, it's somewhere around 10 trillion. This is not estimated, this is like really what the money we are spending today in healthcare. And that's almost 10% of the global GDP. And various players in the healthcare ecosystem are built based on certain view of the world. And I'm going to just share a couple of examples of how these views are being challenged. But the list can continue. It's a much bigger list. One example is we are fundamentally seeing different patients. If you look at the trend in medicine right now, in the past few decades, now we have more people living into their 60s and older than those who died before their 60s. And that's good news. I mean, that's a moment that medical science should feel proud, but at the same time, it introduces a fundamentally different challenge to the world of medicine. So here is a paper that came out of our lab last year, which shows basically, just look at the red line with 5+. So what it said, we looked at 5.5 million people, patients in NHS, and we looked at the time at which they have their first incidence of a cardiovascular disease, like a stroke or something like that. And at that point, we counted other diseases they had. If you look at the x-axis is showing between 2000 all the way to 2014. So in the past 15 years almost, what we see is that there is a 4x increase in the number of other diseases people have when they get their first cardiovascular disease. Is it the same patient? If your underwriting manual is from 15 years ago, are you really talking about the same patients anymore? It's different demographics. People are living older. When people are older, they are fundamentally a different patient. And that's very important for medical science as well as the insurance industry, as well as other players in the industry to be mindful of. The second thing is this notion of alternative data in healthcare that is becoming more and more successful in showing pathways for impact. There is a recent paper out of Imperial that have been basically saying, if you tell me roughly your postcode, I could go look at the images of your street through Google Map, for example, and try to see if I can predict things about your health as well as other things. And this shows the amount of correlation. You see almost 80% correlation in the graph that is trying to look at the pictures of your neighborhood, not even in front of your window, just roughly your neighborhood pictures, and can that picture be predictive of your health, deprivation, and disability? It's a shocking result, and that's actually a London example here, but they tested the results in Birmingham and Manchester and a few other cities, and it actually holds up quite nicely. So what it means is that your medical data is not just about your MRI images, or it's not just about your genetics data, or it's just not about your blood test. It's much more complex than that, and that's where I think a lot of the existing assumptions about medicine will be challenged. And I'm not sure how visible this chart is, but basically what it shows here is a list of FDA-approved AI in medicine. And the list, you see from here almost, we are in 2018, all the way to almost now. And the pace of number of AI, FDA-approved AIs for various parts of medical value chain is increasing dramatically. And it seems to be working quite nicely that FDA is happy for these things to be released into practice. And they cover ranges of medical practices, psychiatry, ophthalmology, and radiology, neurology, everything. There's a huge range of disciplines that are being impacted by these AIs. And I think that's where fundamentally we are seeing that in medicine, there is a high chance that we are moving from, like if you think about what insurance in medicine was, it was about predict the likelihood of a risk and then pay for the claim when it comes. In light of a new prediction economy, it seems to be moving more and more towards predict the likelihood of a risk, try to prevent, and make that prediction personal and try to prevent at a personalized level. And that's, I think, the transformation we seem to see. And in light of that, I hope that you leave this talk with one question that you try to answer, which is, after all we see and a lot more that is out there that I didn't get a chance to talk about, who is the optimal owner of the medical risk? And of course, the same questions apply to many other domains of insurance. With that, I thank you for your time and coming to this talk. And all right.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Reza. So, hello, everyone. That's very interesting, isn't it, to get that kind of very specialist analysis of business models and also that health insurance angle. We're now with this brilliantly mixed and diverse panel in terms of their experience and what their history is and what their jobs are today. You can see, I'm not going to waste any time by saying what you can actually read. We're going to now dig into the nitty-gritty of what it is to actually think about and implement the right kinds of changes using AI technologies in actual insurance companies with actual customers. And actually, the customer is going to join this discussion as well, because that's going to be one of the focuses of our discussion. So very briefly then, Orlando, to my far right, Chief Data Scientist at Aviva. Okay, I've just broken my promise about not saying what you can read. Orlando's got some really interesting experience, actually, which is going to come out in this panel shortly. But I was really impressed by the fact he was in King's Cross 25 years ago, enjoying the social scene, when I was hurrying from point A to B with my head down. Next to him is Ashish. Now, I actually just referred to Ashish, to his face, as the Che Guevara of AI in insurance. And he seems to be quite happy with that, actually. So you can make up your own mind when you hear him. Next to him is Emma. And Emma's looking at me like that because she knows I'm going to say she was really impressed that Orlando Bloom was here last night. And actually, I was quite impressed as well. I didn't see him, though. And right next to me is Electra, all about user-centric approach to the law and a big focus on privacy, bias, and the health of the whole ecosystem, especially the end customer. Now, what you've got here is a panel of people who are actually, although two of them have big jobs in big insurance companies, are actually outsiders working from the outside in. That's a really important perspective. And actually, with Emma and Electra, you also have some people who are deeply interested in insurance, but who are also looking at us and you from the outside. So what the guys are going to do is they're going to take a couple of minutes first. What I asked them to do was to pick one thing of the many things that they could talk about that they're doing now to change the status quo and why they think it matters in relation to this bigger topic, okay? So we're going to start with Orlando. So Ashish, would you give... Okay, yeah, Orlando.
Morning, everyone. How are we doing today? Good? Yes, so one thing that's difficult. So some of you might know Aviva. You're probably familiar with the brand. You might not know that we were founded in 1696. So we're an extremely old company. So Reza was talking about prediction, and in the 1700s it becoming a big problem. We were there at the very start. So prediction has always been part of the Aviva business. For the last few years, Aviva within the industry has become known for, again, some of the things that Reza's been talking about: digital transformation, disruption, the fact that we've shifted loads of people to Hoxton. We own lots of Hoxton Square in Shoreditch. We've also invested in talent. These are kind of new skills: digital marketing, data science, machine learning, at scale. But really the important thing has been about customers for us. Because customers, we know, don't trust insurers. Insurance has become it has got a very corporate perception amongst customers, and people think that customers aren't loyal to insurers, and customers think that we rip them off. And we've tried to actually fall in love with our purpose again, because to us, it's not about ripping customers off. Insurance should be about protecting the things that customers find most valuable at some of their toughest times. And so if we think about where we're driving customer value and customer outcomes, we don't expect customers to know or care about machine learning, artificial intelligence, digital disruption. We do expect them to care about the fact that we don't penalize them at renewal by putting prices up. We're trying to streamline the claims process. We're trying to take the time it takes to underwrite people down from 4 weeks down to 3 seconds. Those are the things that we are using AI and machine learning to do, and it's all centered around trying to drive value from customers. So that's the big thing for me.
So falling in love with the purpose. I like that. Ashish?
Hi. So I work for AXA XL, which is the commercial and specialty division of AXA. And so we have sort of big risks around commercial insurance, but also catastrophe risks, so hurricanes, wildfires. The kind of risk that touches a lot of industries, countries, big populations. And quantifying and really understanding that risk is hard. We're also at the same time looking at the nature of evolving business models. So we have shared economy, we have gig economy, we have, there was conversations about evolving cyber risk and the whole connected nature of risk. We talk about smart cities. All of these, while really exciting propositions, also create an environment of really complex risk, which is hard to understand. And what we're trying to do is trying to sort of fundamentally change our ability to learn and improve the risk posture, understanding a risk posture, and what does risk really mean in these situations. And by monitoring and working very closely with our clients, to Orlando's point, we're able to then create mitigating strategies and ways of working in partnership with the clients. So use of technology and data to then drive a better understanding and helping manage risk is where we're moving away from the very transactional nature of just paying for a cover to then helping manage and monitor and be partner with the clients. That's where we are.
So I lead marketing at a technology company called Cytora, and we're focused on helping commercial insurers to transform the accuracy and efficiency of their underwriting using artificial intelligence. And I wanted to start off by giving our definition of what artificial intelligence means to us, because I'm aware that it's a very loaded term. But at Cytora, the way that we define AI is it's the computer having an ability to make a prediction based on finding patterns in data. And at Cytora, we make a lot of predictions. We make predictions about, will this building catch fire? And if it does catch fire, how much will the claim cost? And we serve these predictions up to underwriters to help them make really fast, better informed decisions about the risks that they are underwriting. And I think the problem that we're really solving here is we're making underwriting a lot more efficient. So today, if you want to buy car insurance or travel insurance, you can purchase this in a matter of minutes. But if you want to buy business insurance, that could take up to 7 days. And this means that the customer experience isn't great. And this is because the underwriting process itself in commercial insurance today is still extremely manual. So underwriters are spending up to 50% of their time actually going out and gathering information and assembling data sets and then trying to analyze the risk based off that. What we want to do at Cytora is serve them up these predictions so that they can make really fast, accurate decisions. And that's really great because it means the customer gets a better experience, they get a fairer price, and it actually reduces the cost of delivering insurance for the insurance company. So that's kind of what we're focused on at Cytora, is really making risk transfer a lot more effortless, making insurance a lot more easier to obtain for businesses. And that's what we're working on.
Hi, everyone. I'm Electra. I'm the founder of The Law Boutique, and I founded The Law Boutique in 2017 after spending 10 years in large organizations and witnessing the inefficiencies of the legal industry. So we focus on startups, mainly tech startups that are very fast growing, and the main focus is actually data. And how do we create the companies of the future that are really taking data ethics seriously and ensuring that they're doing their bit for society in the future? So data ethics is the new sustainability and corporate responsibility, I think. So our focus is very much on making sure that these companies understand that, what the commercial implication of that is, and also how they need to be responsible in the future.
Great, thanks very much. So the first question then, and we're going to go to the true outsiders first, Ashish and Orlando, so a little bit of patience. My first question is, right, from your different perspectives, we'll start with you, Emma, in a second. Okay, we talk endlessly in insurance about the challenges that we face in not just understanding technologies, but working out how this changes what we do and how we do it and why we do it. Just share a couple of examples from your perspective of educating and selling stuff to insurers, right? Of what you see in terms of how people are thinking about this and what they're actually doing about it.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges that we face at Cytora is, especially from a marketing perspective, is we're asking people to really trust a technology that they're not very familiar with to guide their decision making. And that's quite a scary thing for some people. And that's definitely a big challenge that we have to overcome. And our marketing team spends a lot of time thinking about how we can build a brand and how we can position a product that people will feel confident and comfortable using and that people trust. And for us, it's we focus a lot on transparency. So explaining exactly how our products work and when they perform really well and when the AI doesn't actually perform very well. So a really good example of this is in the SME market, the AI performs really well because there's a lot of data available for us to use to understand those risks. Whereas at the larger, more complex end of the market, the AI doesn't perform as well because those risks are harder to assess and there's not as much information available. So we're super transparent with customers about what we can and can't do, and that definitely helps to build trust.
Thank you. So we'll come back to the issue of how much data is enough data, hopefully, if we have enough time. Okay, so Electra then, from your perspective, looking in at insurance, challenges and opportunities, I'm guessing you're going to want to talk about privacy, but go for it.
Yeah, so I think there are some existing issues, namely GDPR, which is probably not everyone's favourite word, but my question is it actually a legislation that's already outdated in light of the technological developments currently? And are you able to build a truly GDPR-compliant AI system or blockchain or anything that's so innovative with GDPR in mind and privacy by design in mind?
Okay, so Ashish, you're holding the mic. So you can obviously pick out some challenges and opportunities from your perspective as well, or pick up one of the things that Emma or Electra has said about, you're in an insurance company trying to make this big change, challenges and opportunities from your perspective.
Yeah, so I'm nearly 2 years into the company, but also being relatively new to the insurance industry. And as an outsider coming in, and also to some extent as an academic coming in, there's a lot of conversations that I have which don't talk about technology. It's more about demystifying the whole world of what does emerging technology mean, what is its adoption, and what is that thing that you can grab and actually work with to drive a product out in the market, a conversation that really helps people understand. And I think that first step is very much in helping the business articulate the challenges or the opportunities that we're really trying to explore. Getting from there to the actual launch or running an experiment is the bit where I think we were getting hopefully a little bit better at. But I find the challenge of helping take that conversation from why would we want to do it, what's in it, and why shake the status quo of how things are working. And I think insurance is now seeing the concepts of things which are, again, pervasive in other industries like design thinking and so on, now coming in and creeping in, and they're getting quite excited about that.
So what do you think is making the change then? I mean, is it partly you, right? Or what are the drivers to unlock people's minds, right?
Well, there's a level of maturity that the industry is going through. So there's always that kind of bootstrapping period where there's a lot of noise and a lot of things happening. Nobody quite knows exactly what will stick, what will not. And there's that whole, again, we live in a world of uncertainty, and there is that uncertainty of, is this technology really where we put our money into? Is this what is going to be the next big thing? And I don't think you need an answer for that. What you need to do is be quite open-minded and run a whole bunch of experiments and work with, have skin in the game to really understand what does this really mean in the context of applied outcomes.
Okay.
And driving that, I think, is where the industry is now maturing to a point where we're raising the bar across the market.
So we're going to come back and talk, hopefully, a little bit more about that in a moment. So, Orlando, what do you see?
I think one of the things that's very clear when you move into the insurance industry is that the amount of technical legacy is way beyond, I think, other people's expectations. So I've been at Aviva for 2.5 years. I was at Money Supermarket before that. And when I left Money Supermarket in 2016, we were in the process of replacing our legacy database. And the legacy database had been switched on in 2012. And I've joined Aviva, and we actually have operational systems that are 50 years old, 50. And I think when I talk to startups about that, they think I'm exaggerating. And when I talk to other people within the financial services industry, they join me nodding and maybe sobbing. Because it's really tough. And I think when I heard Reza talking, I think it was great that he talked about talent, he talked about acquiring data, he talked about A/B testing, and he talked about engineering. I think on top of that, there's a real challenge around tackling technical legacy head-on. Because AI, machine learning, these things are powered by data. And I think without really investing in the data engineering challenges, I think people will always be left behind.
So that tech legacy, I mean, I've been in the insurance market since 2008. People were talking about that then. I remember sitting opposite a CEO saying, I'm heartily sick of hearing about us needing to change our legacy systems. He's not a CEO anymore. So what's going to be, what practically can you do about that, given that this has been, a board topic for the entire time I've been in insurance, and I'm sure for years before that, Orlando? Any thoughts?
I think in practice this involves typically building layers of data that are a bit more contemporary over the top of existing policy admin systems. I think there's going to have to come a time where people actually look to reinvent some of the back end of insurance, which still hasn't really happened at any kind of scale. But I think it will have to at some point. I think, to Electra's point, I think GDPR kind of helps in a way. Because requiring you to have audit trails of customer data, requiring you to be able to delete customer data, these things fundamentally mean that you have to understand where the same customer sits across multiple databases. And so I think it kind of forces the issue, so I think it's helpful.
Yep. Okay, thank you. At this point, any questions, observations from you? Because you're part of this conversation too. We'd like you to be. So, yes. I daren't jump, but if you want to come and get the microphone. Oh, no. They're on their way.
Thank you for a very insightful talk and sharing your experiences. Given what you said, is it the technology companies who will make the more efficient and effective insurers of the future?
Who wants to take that? Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think in practice, the places that consumers buy products and services for are driven by consumers themselves. And I think insurance is a difficult market to break into. It's very highly regulated. I think there's a lot of kind of drags, structural drag in the system, which means it's not always a great industry to break into, but it could be a great industry if you're an established player because you've got the customers, you've got the data, you've got the products. And given that a lot of the data that certainly we hold is, these are things that we know about customers and we can learn about them that are very difficult for other people to learn about. So we kind of think that we've got an advantage there, a competitive advantage, and it's potentially quite a difficult thing to break into. I think, that said, some of the components of the insurance process are very easy to be disrupted by a technology provider. And I think partnering with technology companies is going to be the way that a lot of people go.
Okay. The other hand over here, can you shout? Go for it.
So what can the insurance
So getting better at getting talent, is that what you mean? Yeah? You're being kind, aren't you? Okay. So, Ashish, you're ready?
Yeah. So it's hard. It isn't the sexiest industry where people want to come and work as data scientists and engineers. I think the insurance industry hasn't articulated the challenges and the opportunities that the industry can bring to the more sort of the academics or the people who are really looking for a big challenge. And if I were to sit down and really talk about some of the things that I look at now from sitting within the industry, I would say that these are really complex problems to solve, and there isn't a right answer, but there's a whole path of exploration and discovery. So we need to be more outspoken about how do we present the opportunity for people to come and work in the industry and be excited about it and feel that they're challenged and they're learning something and then rolling out products and services in the market and so on. So the onus is very much on us to try and talk more about that. And I think, again, reflecting back on the conference as a whole these 3 days, you have a whole diverse set of people who come and listen to these talks, and they take those reflections away. But I think the conversations I've had more one-to-one is been about how do I come and learn a little bit more about the insurance challenges and what is it that you're trying to do in understanding autonomy, or how do you look at catastrophe risk, or how do you model hurricanes and climate, and how can we participate in? So there's an element of that. People want to be connected to some kind of the purpose-driven side of things, because insurance does touch everything, and I think talent can come and really make a big difference to the industry. So working with academics to try and bring in talent, but also appealing to the market in other sectors where people move in. And I come out from a different industry, and I'm really excited to be here.
So in our pre-chat, Orlando was saying, a lecturer, when he learned that you were a tech lawyer and the kind of things that you were interested in, he said, we've got loads of M&A lawyers as a mature insurer, but we don't have enough people like you. So what would it take to get people like you into insurance?
I think it probably needs a rebrand. I think it needs to get sexier, because at the moment it's just not. But if you bring in the tech element to it and the impact that AI could have, and you make that more known, then that could probably attract more talent.
All right, well, I think that leads us on to our next question, actually, which we wanted to talk about data ethics and ethical design, and all of those driving better customer outcomes issues. So, Orlando, I'm going to come back to you, actually. When we had a chat, you were very eloquent about, because I challenged you a little bit, didn't I, off stage, about really dual pricing, loyalty penalties, all of that good stuff, and does the Aviva Drive app really make a difference? And you had lots to say about what you and Aviva are doing to really drive better customer outcomes with an ethical design framework in mind. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. I think on the issue of pricing and the fact that we've historically charged loyal customers more than new customers. I think people who work within the insurance industry understand what's happened there. I think price comparison sites, amongst other businesses, have driven the cost of insurance down to the fact that if you want to compete for your first year customer, if you want to attract a customer, you need to charge pretty much less than it costs to actually have run the policy. And so recouping that money in later years has become the way that it works. And I think our way through that is to use data science and machine learning and AI actually to think about capitalizing on our data asset. How do we win customers for the long term? How do we make sure that we're cross-selling to customers? How are we actually doing things that are about engaging with people? And then we think we don't have to fall into that trap. So we've launched new products that don't have that feature. We won't be charging you more than existing customers. But I think there's a much broader question around the ethical use of data there. And I think for insurers have been pretty bad at writing down the principles by which they operate. And that's probably not just true for insurers, but it is specifically true with such a data-driven industry. And what the public debate about data ethics is actually forcing the industry to do is write down some of these principles and make sure that we can hold ourselves to account. And I think one of the nice things about algorithms is that ultimately they are auditable, and people talk about black boxes and people talk about neural networks and the fact that these are difficult to understand. Ultimately, there are formulas there, and they are auditable in a way that's far beyond the auditing capability of a human, the ultimate black box machine. And I think, historically we've made judgments that have been very, very ad hoc, without the ability to actually understand the process by which those decisions have been made. And our debate about data ethics is forcing us to write down and stick to those principles, which are far deeper than just pricing decisions about a specific product.
So obviously I'm not going to ask you details about the insides of Aviva, but in general terms, matching up that, yes, we need to capture our principles and make sure that our principles stand up from a compliance regulatory, from a purpose-driven, but also from a profit-orientated point of view. Just a couple of maybe questions, not what you've been doing and the answers that you've had, but some of the thought process about how you as an organisation are thinking those complications, if you want to put it like that, through. Orlando, are you happy to do that?
I think if you get to the fundamental operation of an insurance business, it's kind of all about getting the balance right between pooling risk and getting people to contribute in terms of price in proportion to the risk that they add to the pool. And trying to understand that trade-off is an ethical question. It's actually trying to say, how far do we want to go in terms of pooling risk? Where does it become wrong in some way? How far do we want to go in terms of getting people to pay in proportion to their price? When do they become uninsurable? And so we have a data ethics forum which is sponsored by our group exec team. We're also partnering with Cambridge University, because what we don't want is a situation where we're just marking our own homework. We're just deciding ourselves that this is ethical and then we're doing it. So I think it's very important, firstly, to have executive sponsorship. And then secondly, I think it's very important to get some kind of third party who's typically, and the people that we're working with at Cambridge are not machine learning people, they're not AI people. These are ethicists and people that are helping us with the ethical discussions around what we're doing fundamentally.
Great. Ashish, coming to you then.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that, and I'll add on to it by saying that it's not something, we cannot think about ethics in a silo. It is something that needs to be out there in conversation and being discussed in forums about what is it that you really mean by ethics in the very first place, but also how do you as a company be more responsible in adoption and implementation of technology. So we need to understand how technology works. We need to be able to explain that, and we need to be quite transparent about how we're using the data, how it's being ingested in technology, and what is actually part of the products and the services we are reaching out to our customers with. There is a technology or a demystification element to it, but there is also a very important element where we need to educate and work together with universities and ethicists and academics and government in its adoption.
Something fell over, but we're still here, so that's okay. Emma, we were talking before about the kinds of questions that your customers ask you about. I'm going to hand this to you in a sec. About that black box and the questions that they have around that. Are you interested, heartened? It's just another bit of the conversation to get to a sell. What's your viewpoint as Cytora?
Yeah, I mean, we're very interested. We spend a lot of time thinking about explainability. It's kind of one of the things you really have to provide. If you're providing someone with a prediction and you're expecting them to make a decision about what they're going to do next, based on that prediction, you have to explain how you arrived at that prediction. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can build explainability into our models. And we actually have a feature called Key Drivers, which basically breaks down how we arrived at a specific prediction. So it might be things like, how tall is the building? What is this building used for? Maybe it's a fireworks factory. What's located next to the building? And we provide these key drivers every time we provide a prediction so people can actually understand where it's coming from. And that's something that's really, really important.
So, lecturer, you're sitting here listening to this. How are you feeling about it? What response would you make?
I think we need more law, actually, which is probably an unpopular viewpoint, but I think we need a GDPR point 2 without all the privacy policies into your inbox. I think we need a focus on how this is going to work in practice. I don't think the GDPR was done in that way, and I think that we now need to look at it slightly differently and from a more pragmatic point of view.
So more law. Couple of examples of that, what that actually looks like, maybe, or just one example for you?
I think we need to think about how we create these products and how it's great that Aviva has the capacity and the resource to have these data ethics groups, but what about the tech startups that don't have that? How do they know what's right and what's wrong if they don't have a think tank? So it's more about guideline, and there is no black and white way to say this is how you need to do it because it's so new and because we haven't seen what it can do. But having a bit of guidance and an understanding of what the outcome needs to be, I think, is the right approach.
Yeah, and that's very much to your ecosystem point as well, isn't it, Ashish? What do you want to say?
Yeah, so chiming in on that, so we are part of these accelerator programs where there's a lot of startups that get selected as cohorts, up and coming, and really good propositions and so on. And we go to them as mentors to help them understand the world of insurance and be the subject matter experts, if you like. But quite often, and I think more often than not, we are actually being reverse mentored by those companies in understanding the use of that technology because they're far more forward thinking and are actually iterating on those products and services much quicker than we are able to understand them. So I do actually like the fact that when we have people from our company in the various business units going out and mentoring and helping these companies understand what does insurance mean in the context of that technology, they come back with this, sparkle in their eye saying, actually, I learned a lot about technology. I didn't know that this kind of technology existed. So, and then the conversation becomes really interesting because they're working together to explore compliance, regulation, technology, adoption, and so on. And that's where I think is the sweet spot of that bidirectional flow of wisdom and education in some ways.
Okay. Coming back to you then. Any questions, observations? Yes. Do you mind shouting? She'll get to you, but if you start shouting.
Probably accompanies it is increasing prediction accuracy. What have you got to say from an insurer's perspective about non-insurance of some members of society as that prediction cost falls and the accuracy increases?
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, for those who didn't hear the question was around as the cost of prediction declines and the accuracy of prediction increases, what do we have to say about uninsurable people that are maybe uninsurable because we can predict to such a high degree of accuracy that they are going to undergo some kind of claim event that we don't want to insure them. It's a big issue, and I think typically we see that it's less of an issue within general insurance, so within car insurance, home insurance, things where there's a lot more intrinsic risk that we think we're probably never going to predict. That actually it's less of an issue. I think where it is a big issue is life insurance, and in particular the use of genomic data for life insurance. And as an industry, our response has been essentially we've all agreed not to use genomic data on the whole for pricing. There are some exceptions, but on the whole we don't use genomic data to price people.
That's a voluntary thing though, right, Orlando?
Yeah, there are a few exceptions, but on the whole. I think that probably isn't going to be sustainable as an approach. I think we need to probably have an industry-wide approach, and we need to be, and there's a big role for a regulator there. I don't think individual insurers can make a call on that. I think it's an extremely important, very, very serious issue that I think requires industry-wide collaboration and regulator collaboration. There's an analogue in the flood examples. There's something called flood re. Essentially, some homes are at such a high risk of flooding that they were at risk of becoming uninsurable. And the industry response was essentially to join forces on that. So I think similar approaches for more predictable events in the future are likely to be the way to go.
Is that okay?
Can I quickly add to that?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry. So 3 things. I think one point that Orlando mentioned is how far is going too far to really understand the level of risk and what do you really need to use. The second point is understand there is this area of parametric insurance where you're actually using only a set of parameters, and anything that goes above or below a threshold, you get paid out. And that kind of insurance is, because of the increase in accuracy of the data and the ability to predict the power, you're able to create this much more frictionless products that are able to detect something which make insurance much easier.
Okay, so there are some wins on that predictability and using it more because of the lower costs. Okay, sorry, quickly, your question?
In relation to climate change, any further reflections on the insurer's role in data? Because you mentioned the models at the moment aren't very good. We know from climate scientists that these extreme events are only going to get sort of more extreme and more frequent, and that's really already challenging the insurance sector. So any reflections on the insurer's role in actually collecting that data, analysing that data, and using AI would be appreciated.
So I'm going to very briefly touch on that, and then I'm more than happy to discuss in more detail offline. So one program we've looked at, for example, and Chip Cunliffe spoke at the climate stage day before yesterday, which is that we funded about 25 years of deep ocean and coral reef research. And all of that data obviously resulted in a lot of academic research, publications, etc. And we're now trying to put a program together where we can try and look at the broader benefits of the data that was collected and the research that's been done. Again, in alignment with the SDG goals, but also other programs where we can collaborate together with governments and institutions. I think it is something which is becoming more, well, we've also created something, we partnered with Google to use that research to create education programs for school children. And it's reached out to 5.5 million children where we're taking education about climate, about ocean, about coral reefs straight into the classroom. And I think that's another way of using the data to create an education program, which I think is incredibly compelling. So it isn't always about the AI, but certainly we can use technology as a means of education and imparting back to...
There's a massive and long-standing set of data and analytical approaches for natural catastrophe, certainly in insurance and reinsurance.
Yes.
So is your question, are you going to let you use it? Is that the question as well? Right, so it's collaboration with, yeah. And a more structured, slightly more formal.
So
over to you,
Ashish. We fund a number of PhDs and a lot of academic research programs on a continuous basis.
So I know AXA XL and Aviva are busy doing things, but you're big, you're massive actually, aren't you, as individual companies? So I suppose maybe it's about insurance as a whole sector, somehow as it did with Floodry, perhaps, just an idea to think about these big problems that clever people we know would want to solve. If only they knew us better, Ashish. There's something there to think about, isn't there? Okay, so we're coming into the last couple of minutes or so. So really wanted to just get your take, actually, as individuals. So Ashish, do you remember you said to me the important thing, and you mentioned it earlier, is just get started. I'm going to come to you first, Electra. If Ashish is saying to insurance, we should just get started with this, from your perspective as a tech lawyer, where do you think they should just get started? What does that look like? One idea.
That's a really difficult question. Yeah. I think consider the outcome. I always talk about outcome. Consider the outcome. How do you want this to look like? And then start from there, if that makes sense. Start from the end.
Yeah, I would say focus on identifying areas where you can really liberate humans from doing repetitive tasks that a machine could be doing, so that they can kind of focus on applying creative thinking to insights to really solve hard problems. So yeah, that's where I would start.
Orlando?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with just getting started. I think picking a product that is going to make the most of AI, that's going to deliver customer value, I think is really important, and then getting on and delivering it. And I think where we've had some success at Aviva is actually we try to deliver these things at scale, but we don't pick the things that are that big. So we try to pick individual products, individual propositions, and then launch them at scale, because that allows you to break down any of the barriers along the way, and you learn a huge amount.
Yeah, can I just ask at that point, how much data is enough data in your view, Orlando? Because obviously specialist insurers in insurance don't necessarily have vast amounts of data. So how big does your big data need to be, do you think? I mean, Aviva's obviously Mammothean, but...
It's an impossible question. I think it's totally down to the problem that you're trying to solve. I think all insurers will have different types of data. We've got 16 million customers in the UK. We've got 33 million globally. And we might, for some of these customers, we'll have several thousand data points when you put it all together. But I think it's less about the size of the data. It's more about what you do with it. And it's kind of trying to pick the trends, trying to pick the insights, trying to separate the signal from the noise and hone in on the problem you're trying to solve and use just about enough data to solve that problem.
Okay, so we now have a helicopter to add to the noise. So let's finish off then. What I asked all our panellists to do, are you turning me up or am I shouting, was to think about, on panels, people really do want to give their best to you. So they think about what they're going to say, and we try and have a proper conversation, which I think we have had today. Hope you agree. But I'm really interested. I've asked these guys to do something slightly different as well, and a little bit difficult, is to pick one thing that someone else has said or a question that's been asked that's made them think, oh, I really need to look at that or think differently about that. So, Emma, as a marketer, you're used to listening to other people's thinking and thinking, oh yeah, I need to make a note of that. Has anyone said anything or sparked off any thoughts in you that's made you think slightly differently as to when you came and sat down here?
I guess not necessarily made me think differently, but something that I definitely that really resonated was when Orlando kind of mentioned that insurance isn't very trusted as an industry. And I think there's a lot of research that actually says people trust banks and retailers and healthcare providers more than they trust insurers. And I think that sparks a really interesting conversation around how can insurers kind of rebuild this trust with consumers, and how can technology like AI really enable them to improve the customer journey to build that trust. Yeah.
It's something that Emma said actually about, and the word that she used, which is explainability. I really like that word because it's really simple and it's exactly what we mean when we say an audit trail. But that's right, transparency comes with explainability and being able to relay it in layman terms so people understand why you're giving them a price or why you're saying that their risk is higher. So I think that's a really interesting point.
I might cheat and pick a couple, but on explainability, I think the interesting thing is that it's a very hot topic, but within the AI and machine learning community, it's quite a controversial topic. There are some people that are very anti-explainability because it might reduce predictive power, whereas actually amongst consumers, explainability is typically what people want. So I think finding a way through that kind of dilemma, I think, is really, really important, and setting out principles is a way to do that. I'm going to pick the other thing around, we need more law. I think it's kind of unusual for a very highly regulated industry to say we need more law. I think one of the great things that regulators have done is started to upskill themselves in terms of hiring more people with technical specialisms. And I think that's extremely helpful. I think until we can get to real clarity of the law, helping people step into these kind of debates with some kind of technical depth is really, really important. And I think it's a good route towards getting more law, which is, I think, ultimately what we need.
Great. Ashish, what about you?
So, again, I think reflecting on the legal side, we work with a lot of startups, and clearly there's always issues of, can we share our data outside, off-prem? And what does that look like? How do we, how careful do we need to be? Are we compliant with GDPR or not? And I think there's a growing need for the kind of enterprise technologies or technologies companies to focus on, well, what does this data sharing ecosystem look like, and how do we create privacy, security by design? There was a lot of conversation in the earlier panel around ensuring identity, ensuring privacy. All of those things are going to be harder and harder as we move forward. So we do need to rethink about, if you're talking about industrial IoT systems generating data, all of that coming into our environment or sitting on the cloud, we don't really have answers when we are moving into this world of multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, connected cloud environments. So we do need to rethink what does that really mean, and maybe it is GDPR 2.0 or something else. But
Okay.
yeah, that made me think.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that, and please show your appreciation for the panelists.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yay! Oh, got some great fans in the front row. Anyone who is at the back, please come forward. Be close. Welcome. It's the sound is a bit sort of hard to hear in here, so if you come up to the front, you can hear much better. And we have an amazing, amazing panel coming up for you, talking about scaling AI companies. There's some really cool panelists and some hot off the press news that I'm sure you will talk about. So I, for one, am very excited. Please tweet about this at Atomico, at CogX, hashtag CogX19. And without further ado, I would love to introduce our panelists. Please give them a warm round of applause and come to the front.
No, okay, there we go. So welcome, thanks for joining us. We have an exciting panel today. I'm excited. I think so is everyone else here. So I'm Siraj Khalik from Atomico. I'm a partner at a London-based VC firm, previously an operator and founder of an AI-based business in the US, in Silicon Valley. And today, I think the thing that's, to me, exciting about this panel is we have three very, very accomplished people who are building and scaling AI businesses. Very different businesses, but as we'll see, some of the challenges across those are quite common, and really you might relate to these, as some of you in the audience will be starting businesses yourselves. So just to get going, we'll have a brief round of introductions and we'll jump right in. So maybe in order, you could start, Shaukat, by introducing yourself and the company.
I'm Shaukat Shamim. I'm an entrepreneur. I say I'm a serial narcissist. I've tried a few companies, been very fortunate. I was in Yahoo from the very early days. And I run a company called U+. We are creating a video opinion intelligence engine where we understand people's opinion from videos, and we're indexing the world's opinion as they are expressing in a video format in vast amount of data.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Hilliard. I'm COO of Helix. So Helix is a biotech company that's disrupting the pharmaceutical sector. So we're using machine learning to find novel drug disease matches, and then we're taking those predictions forward, testing them, validating them, and taking them all the way through to the clinic. So our first clinical study is going to be in Fragile X syndrome, and we're starting at the end of this year.
And hi, I'm Anders from SpaceMaker. And modestly speaking, SpaceMaker is attacking one of the oldest dinosaurs out there, the construction industry. And we do that by building a software that helps real estate developers and architects explore billions of different ways to solve a site from scratch all the way to the shovel is in the ground. And that creates significant improvements both on the utilization and also the soft qualities for the people living there.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, all of you. So the topic of how do you scale an AI business? Well, the first question is, well, why is that any different to scaling a non-AI business, right? And what is it that we're going to learn about today that is unique and particular to you guys? All of your businesses are built on data. That's one of the first differentiators and one of the first most important things for an AI-based business. There's also questions of culture, of talent, so we'll try and get through to all of those. One of the things that you often hear about is this virtuous cycle of data, where if you're to win, you start with maybe some unfair advantage in terms of access to data, but then that leads you to build a product, and that product leads you to interact with your users, internal or external, to gain more data, which allows you to improve your models, and this cycle kind of repeats itself. And that becomes a moat for you as a business that stops other businesses coming in and just replicating what you're doing. To what degree do you relate to that in your businesses? And we don't have to go in order like this, so start wherever you like. Maybe Anders, let's start with you and work backwards. This virtuous cycle of data, do you relate to that? Does that matter to you?
Actually, I completely relate to it, Siraj. And for us, remember that it's a very undigitized industry, right? So, meaning when you start developing a new site, you start basically from scratch, and the only thing you bear with you is the experience you have from former projects, so it's not structured in any way. So the more users, the more companies and usage we get on the platform, the better kind of the answers gets, but also we are able to aggregate learnings across the portfolio between customers and geos that hasn't been done before. So it creates an immense defensive moat, I think.
Hi, yeah, so I relate to that model at Helix, but actually our virtuous cycle is totally internal. So our customers are our cross-functional project teams, and they use the data to do the drug matching, the drug disease matching, and then the learnings that we get from it, from validating those predictions, we then feed back into our data and our platform to optimize the machine learning and the data that we use. So it's about knowing which data is the most valuable for making the correct drug disease matches.
For us, I think since we are actually we are like Google, we are really indexing all the videos out there. The advantage is there are literally so much video. 74% of the traffic is already video, so there's no shortage of it. So we are kind of doing millions of those videos per day, and we haven't, right now we have the catalog of people's opinion. By far, we are the largest in the world. I don't think bigger necessarily means better, though, in this, because we are trying to understand, people's opinion. So it takes time, and these models needs to be trained to understand different nuances, and it just takes time. So we are in that journey. We are farther along in that journey, but we are nowhere near completion.
Yep, makes sense. And your businesses would not exist without this data, right? And understanding how to get access to this data, how to build upon it, how to spend your resources acquiring the right data sets, getting them to the right formats, all this stuff. I mean, that is something that doesn't tend to happen accidentally. At least I know in my case, we thought very hard about how to do data acquisition pipeline, and so on. Have you formalized processes internally around data? But what are the right data sets to go after? How do you then acquire those? And it'll vary quite differently across your businesses, because your businesses are quite different there. Have you formalized data dashboards, data acquisition pipelines? And if so, how?
For our sake, it's a dynamic set. Like, we deal with people's opinions. I usually say this comment that we know more about Brexit than the British government does. But these are very broad topics, and there's no similarities between, like, what do people think about a product from P&G versus what do people think about Brexit. So, and we are learning in this thing. So we have, I think we have structured how we know how to break down videos and understand what people are saying. We can adjust people's opinion from country, community, cultures, and we can understand implied meaning. But this is such a massive, unstructured data world that we live in, that even of the scale that what we are doing, we are barely scratching the surface.
But you don't have, for example, a customer comes to you and says, I want to understand this particular topic, and then you have to follow a structured process and say, okay, we just don't have enough content on whatever. P&G wants some information about this product.
That happens every day for us. Like, we have lots of clients who do that. So we, on the public video also, on top of that, we have a marketplace of what we call short-form video answers, where there are millions of people. We can actually ping them and ask them certain things that they answer in video, and we put that answer through the same video processing, so we understand stuff. So it happens because many of those things people haven't talked about voluntarily, so we have to kind of probe them.
So it's not an acquisition pipeline. You've created a tool that allows you to very dynamically get the answers.
Correct, yes. It's a marketplace.
Kate, what about yourself?
Yeah, so we're in a very different situation. So our data comes from multiple sources: the biomedical literature, public databases, and our own proprietary data. And we combine all this into a knowledge graph. So we're very structured in knowing which data we want to have. And we're always exploring new types of data that we bring into our knowledge graph and bring into our platform. So the learnings, as I said, the learnings that we have as we have our successful projects then feeds in and helps us understand which is the most valuable data. So yes, we do have a structured approach. We have OKRs. We're very driven to making sure we have the right data.
OKRs around data. So
yes, OKRs around data.
We want this data set by this. Okay.
Yeah.
And for us, I think it's very important to have this right from the start with a structure, but that will change over time, and especially as we grow our customer base and usage on our platform, we will use it in a different way. We have a custom-built kind of pipe running in the cloud, combining, let's say, both geospatial and semi-structured data with more classic structured data, right? And I think we see that we use this for several different things, like parts of the algorithm structures improves very fast, and others are more for kind of learning for the future as well.
Makes sense. Cool. So the next subtopic here is just on culture of an AI-driven business and how that can be different. And again, relating to my own experience, but just patterns we've seen in companies we've invested in, there's almost data-driven and data science-driven businesses. There's sometimes two different cultures. There's a research group, and then there's maybe a more product or an engineering group. And you've got to marry those cultures together. You've got to make sure that you don't have one group that is in perpetual R&D. Sometimes that's not straightforward. And even the R&D group, in our case, resisted the idea of OKRs. No, we can't even decide when we're going to be able to do this. And I've seen this at recent companies we've invested in. How do you see that those two cultures working out? And have you resolved the problem? And you guys are all going through hyperscale soon, so you must have been thinking about this.
Hi, yeah, I'll take that one first. So yes, this is a big challenge for us at Helix because we've got talent both from the pharmaceutical sector and also from the tech sector. And those two groups of people aren't used to working together, so it's even more complicated than having the tech, the R&D versus the product. So what you find is we use different jargon. I'm from the pharmaceutical sector, so I've had to learn a lot about the tech jargon. And we also think in different ways. So that is a challenge. So, a pharmaceutical person does not think in an agile project management way. We're used to critical paths and go, no-go milestones, that kind of thing. So for us, it's about bringing the two groups of talent together. So we're not trying to change either side, but we're trying to meld them together. And I think it's when you can get that melding together that you really create the value. And you need systems that work for everybody. And communication is key.
Just on the communication point, how do you define what you need? Because in some businesses you could say, well, make it 20% faster. Or I want to do this in 1 click and not 3 clicks. With an AI-driven business, it might be sensitivity and specificity, but even that, it's quite hard for product management to tell engineers and data scientists exactly what they want, right? Have you figured out, and each of you, but since you have the mic, Kate, have you figured out how you communicate that?
Yeah, so ultimately, the value for us, the success for us is having a drug-disease match that validates in a disease model, and then we take it all the way to the clinic. Obviously, you can get clinical validation. So that's a very specific data point, but yes, there are lots of other ways of defining success around that are easier to measure, such as speed, accuracy of recall from the machine learning, etc. So yes, we have lots of discussions about this. We have lots of OKRs that help define it. But that's a really important point, and we spend a lot of time thinking about it.
So the first thing for us, I think we are a little bit fortunate because we are kind of inherently a research company using AI as uncovering insights. And our team is a little bit more matured right now. So that the division of there's a research group and then there's a tech group, for us it's kind of not as evident because just the nature of our business. But how we do kind of improve upon what we do is we are kind of learning different things from the same stuff. Like, for example, recently we are modeling people's mental models. So it is basically looking at the same data and running an AI model to understand what mental stage they're in. So there you actually go in with an objective or what you're trying to do. And once you start running these models, your initial response is going to be pretty bad. So you will then train it over time to get into an acceptable range where you know kind of predictively we are over 70+%. So you can say that they belong into one stage. Depending on what you're trying to get to, this can take anywhere from like months to like a year, depending on the complexity of the problem is. So that's how we do that.
And for us, I also think we've been fortunate in the way that we are almost only tech people up to now. So when we crossed kind of 20 people, we restructured the operation into squads, cross-functional squads, where you just have both product and data science and design in the same teams. So it's worked very well on 3-month cycles of development. And but I think the complexity really adds when we now start building up a big commercial organization, because they're not that agile. So they're more used to roadmaps and especially selling things on a roadmap that doesn't exist, which they are really good at.
Makes sense. So with respect to generally the vocabulary problem that we were just talking about, how do you communicate to the data science team what to do? That just happens more organically then. You just have a conversation about, you know, this doesn't seem very accurate. This building is being positioned in this weird way and it's not working, and they just work it out together.
Exactly. So I think that we are able to tackle both long lead items and really short, immediate problems very fast in a model like this. So the crux is to get kind of these teams which are really tech-oriented as close to the market understanding as absolutely possible, and balance carefully the need for solving one thing at one customer's hand with what's needed to take the whole kind of suite or product further.
Got it. Makes sense. So one aspect of scaling, which every business faces, is how to hire talent. With AI businesses, this problem is maybe more acute because of the shortage of talent and the fact that, you know, suddenly it's become very important for everybody to think about machine learning as part of their business, and there's a very limited talent pool, which is increasing, you know, but there's some lag before, you know, everyone graduates, right? So what are you doing to support your businesses in terms of hiring good data scientists? Are you do you have some secrets, or maybe you don't want to share those, but any tricks? Are you training from within? How do you look at that?
I think actually that is one of the most important success criteria when you scale a business like this. And to us, it's been circling around two important things, and that is that the talents of today, they really want to work with something that is meaningful and actually supporting a positive development, and as well as they would like to work with something deeply complex. So for us, our mission since kind of origination for the company has been to develop more sustainable and better cities faster with AI, right? So people can, I think the talents can really relate to that mission. And at the same time, if you look a little bit under the hood, you see that it's extremely complex to make that vision successful. So those two things in combination makes a very distinct value proposition for attracting talents at scale. And I think that if you're able to get that message or a message on those two key parameters out there, then you can recruit much faster and more effectively.
So mission-driven recruiting.
Yeah, very mission-driven.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. I mean, at Helix, we've got a very focused mission, which is to find 100 treatments for rare diseases by 2025. So that is a very kind of a mission that a lot of people can align with. And I think in the AI sector, having a mission that's finding new medicines to treat diseases where there is currently no treatment is really motivational. So from that perspective, I think we have a head start, having that as our mission. But also because we're located in Cambridge, UK, I think there is a great talent pool there. So I think we've got a great geolocation. And it's not just on the tech side, but also on the biotech side. So there's a massive biotech ecosystem in Cambridge, UK. So we have, obviously it's still a struggle, it's not easy. We have to compete, but I do think we've got a lot of things in our favor.
I think regardless of what you do, if you're starting in this space, when you're early, it's very difficult because, everything else seems very shiny. So initially, we got our team from within our network. And we have built from, my co-founder was the CEO of Amazon in India. I built pretty massive companies in multiple companies. So they all came from within our network, and we begged, borrowed, and stole. Now, once you become big, none of these things actually quite matter. Now we get probably more inbound than we can hire. In between is where you need to be creative, because there is basically scale is a massive challenge, and regardless of where you try to hire them, either you cannot afford it, or you will burn too much money, or it will take too much time. So we actually did a kind of more very unorthodox. We actually kind of trained within our, using our expertise, combined expertise. We trained a pretty large force. They didn't necessarily come from an AI background, but now they are one of the world's best. But it took us 2 years.
So you built an internal process to really help scale people and teach new talent. Great. Now, you guys are in Norway, you guys are in Cambridge, UK, you're in 5 places at least. I've forgotten.
8 places, more like.
8 places, there you go. So are there any advantages or disadvantages to building businesses where Europe is at the center? You do have a strong European presence as well. So Europe versus, like, if you were American companies, what do you see as what are the pros, what are the cons?
So I think American companies are like, we think little less, and we burn faster. Whereas I think the European companies are more kind of, they work in steps. I think in general, I find the AI and machine learning skills in Europe is very good. So I actually have built one of my previous companies. I built the entire company in Portugal. They are all PhDs from like Carnegie Mellons and UPenns, but they all went back to Portugal, right? The entire team was full of PhDs. And I was absolutely impressed the kind of skill set that is there in Europe. If I had to build the same thing in the US, it will be next to impossible, given where we are. We are in Silicon Valley, where every other company is bigger than us. So Europe is very well poised for this particular thing that we are doing, especially AI and machine learning, in my opinion. Much better than US.
It helps that DeepMind came from here, and almost one of the first big successes in this space. And there's this mighty oak tree, and all these saplings come up around it, and there's some great talent. But yeah, what do you guys think?
Yeah, for my part, I think Europe, and especially I can relate, of course, mostly to the Nordics. But I think building the business from here has a few significant advantages, and one of them is on talent, actually. Because still back home, if you're a super strong math person coming out of university, the core route today is still management consulting. And when you're building kind of a deep tech company and people start really believing in your mission and that this company could really be something, then it's really easy to attract top talent people. And I think also kind of the salary levels are a little bit lower, so that the OPEX side on the business is, or the burn, as you say in the US, the heavy burn, is lower, substantially lower actually, relating to other places that you could start the business as well.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think, I echo that we have great access to talent in the UK. I think it probably would be much more competitive to build it in the US, in the biotech hubs. So from my perspective, I think it's great where we are.
Awesome. So we're almost out of time. Just, I think the last question for you guys is, really, you're about to each scale in a large way. I mean, what is the single biggest thing on your minds as you enter the next few years ahead?
this is probably one of the most biased answers we can get. We'll pretend to be much bigger than we are. But I think right now our thing that in our head is we are kind of like out of a state of where we are in a hyper-growth mode, but we are trying to, we don't really know what is about to hit us next. We are dealing with data sets that are massive, but it is getting significantly larger, and we don't really know how we're going to handle any one of those. We have some ideas. We have built pretty significant companies in the past, but we also know that doesn't quite apply here. So the idea of the depth of scale in that, from the talent, globally, and through the complexity of the questions that's coming in our way, is keeping us on our toes. We don't know the answers, but we know we have to be creative about it.
You need the process, not the answers, right? The process that gets you them. Yep.
Okay, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is convincing the pharmaceutical sector that we really can scale things sort of tenfold or more over what they're used to. So we talk to the pharmaceutical sector, the biotech investors, and they really don't believe that we can work at the scale that we know that we can work at. So the tech side get it, but the biotech side don't. So I think that's the challenge for us, is to convince them that really we are able to scale.
Super short. I think it is to prioritize the right and most scalable customer situations we have in front of us. And it's also about having a ton of fun while doing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Super informative, certainly for me, hopefully for everybody else too. Thank you.
ideas and find truth. They formed from 1,000 different blocks in 1,000 different shapes. So making sense of the information takes an army and an age. And because every client holds their data differently, behind their own walls, every client solution demands a bespoke approach. And every day our tasks grow more complex. But what if we turned it upside down? And instead of innovating alone, we work together with leaders in technology to create a new standard for the data we use that ensures its completeness and accuracy. We think that could break down the walls. It's been done before to bring down the high walls of banking and open up healthcare. And like wealth and health, unleashing the potential of corporate data will benefit us all. A common data model that frees us and allows us to more easily build smart solutions that fit all of our clients, creating an openness to scrutiny and clarity, creating secure marketplaces and healthy competition across the industry, raising quality levels, cutting cost, affording wasted effort, whilst allowing new entrants in to innovate, freeing our brightest minds to rise above the rubble and complexity and instead shape tomorrow. Engine B, powering a new open age of professional services.
Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here on I know what is the last leg of a 3-day amazing CogX, and hopefully that video gave you some clue as to why you're in the room. The title may also have given it away. I want to introduce two fantastic contributors to this conversation. Uli Homan from Microsoft, immediately next to me, and by way of introduction, titles matter, I think, sometimes, because they give you a sense of the environment in which people live and work, and Uli is a distinguished architect at Microsoft. He'll tell you what that means later. But essentially, and I asked both Seamus and Uli earlier, what does your future look like for you? And in a post-AI adopted world, and what's your role in that? And Uli described it as creating the framework in which that AI enabled society operates through the cloud. So I think that gives us a fair idea of, you probably have a busy inbox.
Well, a little bit, yes.
A little bit, yeah. Now, next with Uli, we have Seamus Ray. Seamus is KPMG. Has a brilliant job title, Digital Disruption, which you can tell us all about in a moment, because this is at the core of that. We're also the CEO of Engine B, which is a video you just watched there that describes a little bit of that. And I did think at the end of the afternoon, after 3 days, you probably need some entertaining. So tell me something interesting, I asked Seamus, and he just told me some other stuff that was less interesting, until he got to the point of the fact that he is going to be establishing an off-grid community in northern Spain, of which you can ask him about later when you meet the speakers. That's not why we're here. What we are here to talk about is the impact of the opportunity that might arise from maximising data and professional services, whether that be law or accountancy or into insurance and others. And just to give you a sense, a little bit of what we're talking about in professional services, I think it's worth at least just reminding ourselves of what that encompasses. Professional services is 11% of the UK's GVA. That's about 186 billion. 13% of our UK employment sits within professional services. That's across all of that. That's about 4.6 million jobs. It's a major major exporter, so roughly about 66 billion in exports. And it underpins not just the two sectors that we've just mentioned of accountancy and law, but actually across professional services, the way in which that operates as a basis for all the other verticals across the economy is a figure that I probably couldn't calculate very quickly, but needless to say, it is quite significant. But what we're going to talk about here is not just about how we maximize the potential for data in the space of the big boys. When we talk about professional services, you'll often think about the big four, you might think about the magic circle, but actually the majority of both in accountancy and law, the majority of actual industry participants are SMEs, right? So there's a great breadth of, and variety within this sector. So that just gives you a little bit of the flavor of what we're talking about here. But let's just go back to some basic stuff. Tell me, Uli, you guys have been working with SAP and Adobe on an open data initiative. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, its objectives, and who you're designing that for? What is your real intent? What's the underpinning assumptions and outcomes that you're looking for?
So when you look at companies, mostly the big ones, obviously, but also lots of small ones, they have a number of systems, Adobe being one, SAP being another one. They're using Microsoft technology and others, obviously. But when they are trying to bring business processes to work from one system to the next, they have to extract the data, transform the data, put it from one system to the next, maybe using API calls if they're lucky. If they're not that lucky and the systems are older, they have to go after databases and other things. So a lot of time and money is wasted effectively taking data from one environment, putting it through a transformation and make it usable in another environment. And Open Data Interchange is a joint initiative between Microsoft, SAP, and Adobe to effectively, at least between these three systems, but obviously going after other systems down the line, making it so that you can design a business process that fits in the right place and start, let's say, in Adobe at their marketing experience management system, ending up in SAP from a business process perspective, and then run big-scale analytics on Azure, something like that, without you having to do any transformation, without you having to taking data extracts and figuring out what they mean and map it to the meaning in one or the other system. So that's really effectively the Open Data Interchange. And the video does actually a great job visualizing these little parts. And what we're really looking at is how do we make these parts, on the outside at least, look the same. So that if you're talking about a customer, it is always a customer in the context of Adobe or context of SAP or the context of Microsoft. It doesn't really matter. And obviously this is open. So once we have more flesh to the bone, this will be an initiative where we will invite other players and other people to participate as well.
Well, that's really interesting. Seamus, the work that you're doing in the accountancy industry looks and feels a bit like an application of exactly this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And is it ostensibly the reapplication of open banking, which is a B2C focused enterprise, into a corporate layer of B2B?
Right, yeah. So we're working in accounting first, and then we'll do legal. But it's exactly that. If you think about the analogy of open banking, we want to do open banking equivalent for corporate data. So that actually allows large organizations or medium-sized organizations to access lots of startups. And the startups don't have to try and get access to individual client systems. They can just go to let's call it an API, and they can get the data in a predictable format. So it's exactly, that's the analogy. And we're working not just on the financial systems, but we're doing structured and unstructured data. So we'll be picking up contracts from contracts databases, invoices, etc., or employment contracts. So startups can then go, actually, I want to do a startup which is going to look at lease contracts, right, and use AI on lease contracts. But now they can actually get access to that and set up a system in a predictable way. So it's absolutely doing that, and we're absolutely going to do it in conjunction with the Open Data Initiative for Microsoft as well. So actually, it'll be open-sourced common data models, and be very clear about how people can access the data as required. So,
can I be really cheeky? And so, disclosure first, I used to work for the CMA, Competition Markets Authority, which you already knew. Yeah. If people are being slightly cautious, they'd say, is this just a way of kicking the competition concerns down the road a little bit?
So, it's a good question, an unfortunate question, but anyway. No, it's fair. So we actually started this project over 2 years ago, and it was a global project within KPMG, and you'll be amused to know that the project was initially called Project Not Kodak, right? So it was trying to do exactly what it says on the tin, right? Which is like, actually, accountancy and legal are going to digitize. How do we keep ourselves in front of that? And then when we looked at the blockers for getting that to happen, and blockers in terms of the innovation from all the startups and why the market's so closed, we came down to the actual getting access to client data in a visible and open way is restricting innovation, and that's why we did it. So we actually had to go to the Competition and Markets Authority and have that conversation. So yeah, they've looked at what we're trying to do, and we're doing it in an open way with all the industry leaders. So all the accounting firms you've ever heard of are involved, and we're working with Microsoft, but we're creating a separate entity which won't be owned by one accountancy firm either. So Engine B will be a fresh entity as well.
So I mean, I mentioned earlier that so much of the professional services sector is made up of these smaller players, both in the Open Data Initiative and in Engine B. It seems to me that there is a degree of reliance of being able to at least standardize internal data to be able to then be able to play in this sort of metadata layer. Tell me a little bit about how you foresee the SME sector being able to be an active part, or is this really designed for those who have got the big existing data blocks?
So the way it works is you will get an open source specification of how you have to model your data. And by the way, SAP has their own data model, Adobe has their own data model, we have our own data model. That's not going to change. So we don't expect internal systems to change necessarily. But what is going to change is how do you present it to the outside? So that if I'm a startup, or if I'm KPMG, or if I'm PwC, whoever that wants to write an AI algorithm that does something intelligent, today I have to go and maybe I model my own data model, and then I have to get the data into that format. With a common format that's understood by enough parties, it becomes interesting to build against that model, which means you can focus on your algorithm and not focus on the data interchange. And that means anybody who is doing this today, I mean, we have a tool in our Power Platform, which is what we call a low-code, no-code scenario, where you effectively use Excel-like graphics to do a transform. And that those Excel-like graphics will understand this common data format. So you effectively say, okay, I have a format on this side, my source side, but you can pick, you don't have to, but you can pick the open format to say, I want the data to transform from X to Y, so that, let's say, some of the startups we saw here before could actually work on that data, and they don't have to worry about, oh, this data speaks Swahili and I speak English. So effectively try to get to English as a common language, understanding, so that you can focus on value add rather than on transforming data back and forth.
So the thing to remember is, and Sophia really hinted at this at the moment is a $1.2 trillion marketplace globally, and by 2023 it's expected to be $2.2 trillion, right? So this is a massive, massive marketplace, and it's a long tail of medium-sized and small organizations. So, the big four might have 1 million people, and they may do 100 billion of revenue, but actually the future is going to be in the long tail and the startups coming in rather than anything else. So we have to build it for the whole long tail. And in fact, the Competition and Markets Authority also told us we have to do that, but I mean, in a nice way.
They nudged you, it's called.
They nudged us in a nice way.
Yeah, a bit of a nudge. So actually that's really interesting, isn't it? Which is if that's where the transformation can take place, so if I say 5 years out, let's imagine that this has been really successful and that we've managed to somehow supercharge that sort of long tail into some sort of real disruptive, challenging force to the rest of the market. What does 5 years out look like for both of you in let's just say any of the professional services, law or accountancy? Yeah. We'll come on to law in a moment in detail.
Well, for me, I'm going to be an Engine B, right? So it's going to be great. We're working with, in the UK, this is a global project, but we're working in the UK with Imperial on the accounting side and Birmingham on the legal side. And the research we're doing there is about how do we activate the ecosystems of startups into using Engine B and the common data models defined by Microsoft and the industry and startups. So I'm looking and going, can we have a whole bunch of new innovation and technology coming into the industry? The answer's got to be yes. Can it be done in a way where data can be exchanged between startups so you can start having a kind of proper portfolio of systems which can communicate with each other? Absolutely. And I think that's needed as much in law, by the way, as it is in accounting. I think too many small legal startups not talking to each other from a technical point of view is difficult. But our own research says that 69% of audit can be automated, right, in the next 5 years. And when we look at legal firms, the top legal firms, the couple we've looked at, it's 60%, right? So I see, people in this room should be out doing innovative startups and kind of working on that, forcing that digitization forward, I think.
Well, the way I look at this is, we're at Cognition X, right? So the big problem that AI has is access to data. If you don't have access to the right data, you won't make great algorithms, and they don't learn from the data and keep improving. So part of what I look at when I look at Engine X is to really fuel the AI models that you can effectively bring to bear to the audit, legal, and other professional services. And when I look at this is, one of the questions, I'm not an auditor, I have no idea, but one of the things I always keep asking, so why does an audit happen at a certain point in time? Why do we do snapshots? With systems like this, we can actually now go to continuous audit. I can actually today ask for an audit and get it. Today, that's impossible for farms of any size. And so that's just one innovation that we can do. And obviously, allowing AI to really discover anomalies before they even really become visible is, for me, another really big advantage. And competition. At the end of the day, the Big Four are the Big Four for a reason. They're doing a great job, but I'm sure there are lots of people out there that could add value to the conversations around the data that are being produced, generated, and utilized in those audits and other scenarios.
Seamus, you mentioned that some of this is transferable to the world of law, so we've talked a little bit about the Big Four, but obviously we have, again, a long tail of small law firms, but then a cohort at the top of the pecking order. Let's talk a little bit about the applicability of this in terms of the data opportunity that arises, but also, does one offer a greater opportunity than the other, accountancy versus law, or are they essentially going to blend over the next 10 years into a central...
So the big accounting firms are going into law, right? So the biggest law firm in the world is now EY. Good luck to them, really. No, but and I think a lot of the work that it's a kind of continuum between accounting and legal. People think it's very different, but actually it's a continuum. But actually, if you look at the total size of the market, as I said, 1.2 trillion today, 2/3 of that is legal, right? And 1/3 is accounting. So I think the opportunity is in legal. But if we get the accountants to drive this early, then when they're doing the audits, they'll be putting this standard into the clients, right? And then that will open it up to legal as well. So it's a kind of route in, it's to capture the market, if that makes sense.
Is that because actually it's easier to get the clients to agree? Because some of this, actually, one thing that we haven't touched on is as much as this is sitting amongst the organisations that have the data, actually much of the debate that takes place on data rights is really focused around individual data rights. But there's a B2B version of this, right? Whose data is sitting in there in the first place, and how do you culturally get your clients to say, that's fine? How does that work, both in Engine B and the broader ODI piece? So
let me go first, I'll pass over to Uli. So the reality is the audit firms have been making an assumption that they can take all the client data, anonymize it, and use it elsewhere, right? And that's how the T's and C's currently exist in audit. You may be surprised to hear. But last year, 30% of the large organizations changed those T's and C's and said, actually, you can't take all our data. That's of some value, right? And Engine B is on the assumption that now is going to be, data is going to be controlled by the client. It's just like personal data is becoming more important. You want to control who's got it, what access they're going to have, how they're going to use it, and what they're going to do with it when they're finished. That's exactly what we're trying to do with Engine B for corporate data. But it's going to change who owns that data and who's trying to extract value from that data and give it back to the client. So.
That Sounds like a huge task. Really, tell me a little bit about how that plays out in the Open Data Initiative.
Well, so Microsoft is just a platform provider. Our perspective is that your data is your data, and we have no interest in it, and we don't touch it. We just secure it and make sure that nobody else touches it. And we will give you the tools to effectively provide those rights that Seamus talked about to people that you either trust or that you want to do business with, depending on what your desire is. And so that doesn't change with open data interchange, because that's just another tool set on the platform where you can then say, okay, this data, I'm good at giving it into the Engine B environment. It's still my data, but I now give, let's say, EY access to it because they showed me some valuable AI algorithm that really helps me with whatever anomaly A or B or C. So from our perspective, we are just hosting the data, making it accessible, and we're building open tool sets around it so that it can become more valuable to you as a customer, not necessarily to EY, KPMG, whoever the partner is that you're partnering with.
So I've asked Seamus the cheeky question for you. Cheeky question for you, which is that all sounds really altruistic and lovely and fluffy and warm and great. But actually, what's really in it for Microsoft?
It's actually very, very simple. For me, there are three things. One, the relationships. I have a kaput. My finger is kaput.
I'm being
so
really mean.
It's kind of, it's like, it's hard to do, right? So the first one is we value our relationship with the Big Four. We are working great with them, and of course with lots of other people as well. And that's an important piece because we drive a lot of business together, so that makes a lot of sense to us. The other piece is, like with all the other open standards and open source that's happening, the more you create in terms of openness, the more value you create and the bigger the marketplace gets. Because right now the market is segmented because people can't access to the data. Once you open it up, the market opens up, and if you are able to capture enough interest onto your platform, the platform wins, and therefore you make effectively money. And so Microsoft Cloud is the hosting environment, and therefore we're partnering with Engine B and others to effectively make sure that the right tooling, the right openness is there to create this bigger marketplace, and then ultimately we might make money of hosting data, hosting applications, and providing services to people that want to build great applications.
So my follow-up cheeky question to that is tying the two cheeky questions together. So there's a theme to this, which is, isn't that just moving the competition concern somewhere upstream? The holding the data no longer here, but actually the provision of the ability to harvest the data reservoir or the metadata layer through the platform that you provide.
So first of all, this is truly open, meaning if people say to me, well, we don't like Azure, we would like something else, you can do that. It is absolutely possible. It's not something we will help you with, but it's certainly something that is absolutely feasible. It's just that the other cloud provider, whoever that might be, would have to sign up and support the same standards and the same models. There is a couple of other cloud providers, which we will acknowledge.
Other big names are available in this space, is what you're saying.
They are. Which is a good thing, by the way.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Competition is a very good thing. Yeah, we all agree with that. So just thinking about the comparison between accountancy and legal and the other markets in which Open Data Initiative might play, tell us a little bit how that compares in terms of plausible take-up, adoption, and just the size of that opportunity from your perspective. And then, Seamus, I'd really love to hear a little bit about what you were able to learn from those other industries, those other verticals, about how then we create that space for adoption. Because actually, as much as this is a plausible, viable route to maximizing the potential in professional services, it really isn't going to work unless we have some degree of adoption.
I mean, so Microsoft has been on this open data initiative for a while, starting in our Microsoft Business Applications area, which is called Dynamics 365 as a product. And we've been effectively publishing our data models that we're using in our products itself. Because again, ISVs and other partners are critical to the success of business applications, and we can't and won't build everything that people might want. And just to give an idea, we've added a couple of domains in partnership with other customers and ISVs. For example, in the automotive domain, which is focused on dealer management. Not something that Microsoft owns. It's a common data model. We published it. It's out there. And now solution developers can now effectively work on dealers' management solutions for the automotive industry. using this common format. I'm not a spreadsheet person, so I have no idea what the market size is. I'm sure Seamus has lots of numbers.
A numbers man, are you?
But it is something that we are seeing taking hold of everywhere because customers realize they're wasting a lot of time and money, and they're not getting fintechs or biotechs or others to work with them as fast and as innovative as they could because the data is different every time. And so a lot of time is being wasted at the end of the day to create this data that they can operate on. And so having an open model and open way of doing it is for me, opening up beyond what I can really think about. 2.2 trillion sounds great already, but I have no idea what that number really is.
Yeah, so I think so we looked back at previous common data model initiatives, and there have been some in accounting as well. Actually, unless you love them and nurture them and keep them alive and keep both sides, right? So from the service providers and the users, the kind of the big clients who have it integrated in their systems, unless you keep that alive, then it dies over time, right? So and so we wouldn't do this. I don't want to play to Uli's ego, but we wouldn't do this if it wasn't going to fold into something like the ODI initiative, right? So it's part of a global initiative. It's open. And it's got to be owned by the industry and by everybody in the industry and kept alive and loved and cared for.
So let's imagine a future where we've got all this open data sitting around usefully waiting for experimentation and machine learning tools. What is for those who are less familiar with this space, what is the current pipeline of those doing research of using AI machine learning tools in accountancy and law? What does that look and feel like? Is there already populated field of people working in this space?
Yeah, so we did an analysis of startups around the world, right? And we looked for the letters AI in there. And there are 10,000 startups claiming to be in professional services doing AI.
Claiming.
And actually that's the main word here, right? So there's a lot of noise out there, and there's a lot of stuff which just shouldn't exist, if I'm being honest. There's some really good universities doing research. So UCL is doing some work around banking regulatory reporting, not that exciting. We're working with Imperial, as I said, on accounting, Birmingham on legal tech. But also that you look at what's going on in Singapore, right? And actually, I passionately believe if we can get this going, we're starting in the UK, then we're going to go to the US. But if we can get this going in the UK, can we get legal tech back from Singapore to the UK? It's got to be one of our ambitions. And it's got to be also, I hate to say it, done outside of London, right? So let's get AI by the industry back into the UK for legal and accounting. And then we're going to go to New York next. So.
I think one of the things that we've certainly seen at Law Society through our Law Tech Adoption Report is that adoption remains really slow, but it's a really nascent but experimental market. And I think in law, and I think exactly the same, it can be replicated in accountancy, is the mid to longer term trajectory is one where we see real growth in that startup community. And I think we would agree that actually if you're going to do law tech, you ought to do it here in the UK. But I will, on that note, give you both one moment to say a few closing remarks. If there was one thing you wanted people in this room to take away with them, a key message or an ask or a call to action in order to make this a reality, what would that be?
Come and get involved, actually, because we can't just have the common data models and the Engine B project defined by a bunch of pale-stale males in a darkened room in the Accounting Association or the Law Society. So we need to have, I mean, I hate to say it, so we need to have that engagement with some of the tech startups, people who want to get involved as well, I think.
Well, that would have been my call to action as well. Seriously, let's talk, and get engaged, because if it's not an open initiative, it will fail. If it's not a live or living initiative, it will fail. And so we need all of you guys to effectively work in this space, working with us to make this successful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And you can join me in working together by saying thank you very much to my panel.
Thank you, guys.
There will be an opportunity now to meet these amazing speakers. I'm going to ask you to follow the lovely gentleman with the pink paddle and go outside and go to Little Creatures, the sort of bar cafe thing, if you want to meet the speakers. And just before you all rush off, I just wanted to kind of get everyone to stand up. And we're going to do a couple of things because it's the final moment of CogX in this stage right now. So just wanted to do a quick sort of roundup. So if you all stand up, I'd just love you to give a round of applause to the CogX team for amazing organization. And thank you to the technical team as well. Quick reminder about the Sustainable Development Goals. If you haven't looked these up, do. They are super important. CogX is right behind them. Look them up, learn them, understand them. Check out also the CogX Knowledge Center. If you haven't checked that out, it's really awesome and cool, and you should find out about it. There is a hackathon with some young people at 2 o'clock, so stick around for that. And thank you to everyone. It's been an amazing couple of days. I hope you've had a lot of enjoyment from all the content. I feel like I've learned loads. So enjoy the rest of the conference and see you next year. The dates are the 8th to the 10th of June. See you then.